inter-Korean cooperation.
10시 반부터 12시 반까지
It will start at 10:30 and continue until 12:30.
우선 참석하신 분들
First of all,
인사부터 드릴 수 있도록 그렇게
I will make sure that our speakers are introduced. First of all, we have the presenter of the presentation Climate Change in North Korea and Inter-Korean Green Cooperation, Mr. Kang from KEI. And next, we have the presenter of Biodiversity of DPRK and Sustainable Development, Professor Seok from Kyung University. And next, we have the presenter of Wetland Conservation in North Korea and Cooperation Direction to Implement Green Détente from Hans Seidel Foundation Korea, Dr. Hyun-Ah. And we have 4 panelists or discussants, the first of which is Mr. Kang-Man-ok of Busan National University and Professor Yoon Tae-young from Gyeongnam University and Professor Jung-Min from Sunny Korea. And last but not least, we have Mr. Hwang Gyo Uk from Gyeongnam Institute. And I am the moderator of this session. I'm Hwang Young-jo from the Busan University of Foreign Studies. So this is how it's going to be. Each presentation is going to be about 20 minutes, and we will have about 5 to 7 minute discussion, maybe 10 minutes, but 7 minutes, and then I'm sure that that will make it 10 minutes at the end of the day. So in the order of the proceeding, we will start with Mr. Kang Taek-gu's presentation on climate change in North Korea and Inter-Korean Green Cooperation. So please.
Hello, I am Kang Taek-gu from KEI. So I'll talk about climate change in North Korea and Inter-Korean Green Cooperation. And there are some presentations that I've made before, so this presentation is a summary of the previous presentations. Please take note of that. Let me walk you through the Center for Environmental Information of North Korea, and although we are an informal organization, we have several projects. These projects are roughly in threefold. First of all, we take stock of the environmental information in North Korea. Also, we try to identify the cooperative projects between two Koreas. And third is networking and expanding the achievements that we have made. And for the first pillar, we have been focusing on water, like the water supply and wastewater management and climate crisis. And also we take stock of the ecosystem data of North Korea. We focus on the data that are disclosed because we can't access the non-disclosed data. We focus on the international and domestic data. And as for the Inter-Korean cooperative projects, well, we are already 3 years into the project. We had some projects regarding DMZ and natural disasters and climate changes. And also, we conducted research on the North Korean environmental laws. And for the third pillar, about the networking and the achievements, or expansion of achievements, I think that would be our ultimate fruit that we hope to achieve. So we hope to collect all the data and information that we have gathered and disclose them or open them up on the web page.
할까 이런 생각을 그러니까 저희들이 그래서 대단한 자료는 아니지만 사실
Well, this
북한환경연구원이라는
may
것이
not
그동안
be a very grand data per se,
정리가 제대로 되어 있지 않아서
but we
하나를 좀
didn't
모아놓는다
have a
라는
compiled
의미를
version of
두는
the North
차원에서
Korean
자료를
environmental
진행을
data,
하고
and
있습니다.
that is why we are
이게
compiling
간단하게
them all
저희 그
together.
센터에 대한 그 사업 개요하고
And
목표 이런
this
것들
is the
말씀을
overview
드리고요.
of the
말씀드릴 북한의
center.
기후변화, 남북한 녹색 협력에 대한 얘기 말씀 좀 드리도록
And
하겠습니다.
now let me move on to the actual topic of today.
북한의 기후변화 관련해서는 뭐 여러분들께서도 잘 아시겠지만
I believe
뉴스로도
that
많이
you're already
들으셨을
aware
겁니다.
of what's
특히
happening in North Korea in terms of
여름에
climate
되면
change,
여름 같은
especially in
경우에는
summer.
홍수에
There
대한
are
폭우로 인한
floods
홍수에 대한 피해들이
and
상당히
floods
많죠.
and
그래서
caused by heavy
그거에
rains and a lot
대해서도
of damages caused by
김정은
that.
역시 기후변화에 대한 심각성
And Kim Jong-un also understands the seriousness of this natural disasters, and he tries to come up with a response plan. In 2014,
재해 방지 및 구조 복구법을
the
제정한다든지
Natural Disaster Prevention and Restoration Law was enacted.
2019년부터 30년
And also in 2019, the 2019 to 2030 Natural Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy was set according to Sendai
비상설
strategies,
기구이긴
and
하지만
also
국가 재해 방지 대책
North Korea set up a national natural disaster prevention committee. And it is also called the Emergency Disaster Response
일부 이제 국가 재해
Committee
방지
as well.
대책위원회라고 하기도 하고 뭐
And
긴급 재난 대응 국가위원회라고 하기도 하고
these committees can be called in
영문으로
different
대부분
names.
표현이 되고 있는 그러니까 국제기구에서 중국 북한 내부에서 직접적으로 언급됐다기보다는
And this committee was not officially announced by North Korea, but rather there has been some announcements coming from the foreign media, and that is why the translation may differ. But we believe that these different names refer to the same committee.
또 하나는 이런 기후 변화 관련해서도 특히 이제 중요한 건 재생에너지.
Also, in terms of climate change, renewable energy is very important. And North Korea is coming up with laws and strategies for renewable energies. So in North Korea, they have came up with 2013 renewable energy law.
재생에너지법을 제정한다든지 그래서 풍력, 태양광,
So wind power or solar or geothermal heats, these are the areas that North Korea is trying to develop. And in 2014, North Korea also came up with the mid to long-term renewable energy development plan. The idea is to increase the renewable energy capacity to 5 million kilowatts by 2044.
그럼에도 불구하고 기후 위기 대응에 대한 경험이라든지
Even so, North Korea lacks expertise, experience, and technology and resource management capacity. And their infrastructure is not quite well established. And this is something that we can see from the media reports.
관련된 기구에서 들어가서 이제 조사들을
And
하는데
whenever a natural disaster occurs, the international organizations go into that country.
다리가 끊겨서 상대방의 다리가 끊기다 보니까 다리가 끊기고
And they find
연락이
that
안
the
돼서
bridges are
실제
severed and the communications are severed as a result, and that makes it difficult to identify exactly how much the damage was caused by the natural disaster. So this is how infrastructure is quite lacking and insufficient in North Korea.
특히 북한의 이런 그 기후 변화에 따른 어떻게 보면 이 재난 이런 것들이 상당히 좀 악순환
And
형태를
natural disaster caused by this climate change is causing a vicious cycle. Natural disaster leading to flood, leading to infectious disease, leading to healthcare issues, and leading to food shortages, because it would mean lack of crop production and lack of nutrition. So this kind of vicious cycle is going on in North Korea, as in the case of lots of developing countries. Next, I would like to talk about North Korea, how North Korea is responding to climate change, and I'm not sure whether the slide is being pulled up.
PPT가 안 넘어가 있어요.
So there were no PPT slides available.
네. 그러면 제 거는 그렇다 쳐도 그 다음 분들 거는 좀 찾아서
Well,
넣어주시기 바랍니다.
I hope that you
저희가
can make
있을
sure
텐데
that the PPTs are presented on the screen, at least for the
다음 거
upcoming
다음은
presenters.
북한 기후변화 대응
Anyways, let me
관련된
move
건데요.
back. I'll talk about how North Korea is
저희가
responding to climate change.
두 개의 연도, 그러니까 물론 바로 이렇게 연달아서 작업을 못했지만 이제 한번 2019년, 그러니까 2020년, 그러니까
In
2000년부터
from 2000 to 2020, and from 1991 to 2000s, we looked into
30년간의
North Korea's disaster situation. So we looked at how North Korea's disasters happened for the past 30 years.
자연재난 유형별, 지역별 현황들을 좀
And we
정리했습니다.
broke down the North Korea's natural disasters into different types and
주로
regions.
이것들의 자료들은 북한에서 발표되고 있는 자료들.
And these are
국제기구에서
based
나오는
on the
자료들
data that are
중심으로
disclosed by
정리를
North
했고요.
Korea and also the ones that are discovered by the international
총 한 270건
organizations.
정도가 되는데
And we can see that
도시
in
발생은 88건.
from 1991 to 2020, there have been some 272 cases, and there were 88 cases that happened simultaneously. And in 1990s, there were 5 cases, and in 2000s, there were 11 cases, and in 2010, there were 11 cases of natural disasters, which means that the natural disaster occurrence are increasing.
또 하나는 그래서 그리고 저희가 좀 지도 여기서 나와 있지는 않는데 자료집에 보면 그런 게 좀 있긴 한데요.
And these are all included in my slide. I hope that you can take a look at it.
DMZ 지역 중심으로 좀 많이 보여지는
But the natural disasters tend to be concentrated in the DMZ area.
북중 접경 지역이라든지 뭐 이런 지역들에 대한 보도들이 좀 상대적으로 적거나
And there are not much report about what's happening in North Korea and China border region, and that is why, relatively speaking, the natural disasters tend to happen a lot between inter-Korean borders. So it seems that the frequencies of those disasters tend to be quite high, at least according to the data around the inter-Korean border.
기후변화 이거는 이제 저희가 뭐 실온적으로 한번 좀 살펴본 건데요.
And this is something that we
2017년부터
experimented
2022년까지
from 2010 to 2020.
학술지 같은 것들이 꽤 좀 저희 뭐 유료 서비스를 가입하거나 이런 건 좀 접근 액세스를 할 수가 있습니다.
Well, we can access the academic papers if we pay for them, and when you took a look at that,
자연재난 관련된 북한의 환경과 자연재난 관련된 정보들을 다루고 있는 학술지가
there were
기상과
academic journals that deal with the natural disasters of North Korea. Some of the major academic journals are the meteorology and hydrology and forestry and science and technology. And we'll take a look at those academic journals, especially we looked at the period between 2017 to 2022, and
한 5년 정도
that would be about 5 years or 4.5 years.
물론 이제 최근의 자료들은 이 논문들이 검색은 제목은 확인되지만 자세한 내용들은 확인이 되지 않기 때문에
And for the recent papers,
제목을 중심으로 해서 좀
we
이렇게 유형화를 했습니다.
could look at the titles, so we categorize the papers based on the titles.
적으면 제일 좋은데 한 개 유형으로 적기 좀 힘든 상황들이
But for the papers that couldn't be categorized into one category, we had to categorize them into 2 different categories, so there could be some overlaps.
기후변화와 자연재, 그러니까 기후변화
And you can see that the natural disasters and the climate changes take up about 3.3% and 5.5%
자세하게
respectively.
좀 이 부분들은 좀 추후 연구들을 통해서 어떤 내용들이 있는지를 좀 살펴보려고 하고 있고요.
And we want to do a further research
기후변화하고
about
별개로 좀
what's
재밌는
going on.
거는 이게 이제 이 기상수문이죠. 기상과 수문, 산림과학.
And what's interesting is that in these papers, like the meteorologies and hydrologies or forestry and science and technology, these are science papers.
환경과학 기술이라든지 환경 정보화, 그러니까 이제 DB를 구축한다든지 뭐 이런 표준화를 한다든지
And
이런 쪽의 연구들이 상당히 많다라는.
we can see that there has been lots of standardizations of the DB on natural
환경과학
sciences.
기술 같은 경우는
As for the
365건인데 다시 좀 조사를 해보니까 420건
environment
정도,
and
한 20%
technologies,
정도 되고 있는
we can see that there are about 400 cases, and also we can see that the environment information had about 102 cases, and environment science technology had about 365 cases. So these are the overall statistics of the topics that are covered in the academic papers of North Korea. And also you can see that there are lots of papers based on satellite images. Maybe that's because the papers are published in the journal called Meteorology and Hydrology, but that seems to be some interesting trend.
다음으로는 그 이제 자연 재해 유형의 세부 결과들을
And
재해는 어떤 유형들에 대한 연구들이 좀 많나를 좀 살펴봤습니다.
we looked at what kind of disasters happen most frequently.
21건 중에 홍수라든지
And it turned out that flood, forest fires tend to take up the most shares.
좀 약간 편중될 수 있는 게 저희들이
But they
이 자료집이
could be
기상과
quite
수문과 산림과학 기술 통합
focus on one areas
어떻게 보면 수문,
because
산림 이런 내용이
these
있다 보니까
journals that we
재해도
looked at
역시 관련된
have
물과
specific
관련된
topics
홍수라든지
in mind, and that is why the flood or forest fires tend to appear frequently in these papers.
그래서 저희들이 좀 이렇게 기후 변화에 대해서 좀 뭐 정부의 대응들은 어떻게 하고 있고 학계에서는 좀 어떤 식으로 흐름들을 좀
We have looked at what the North Korean government is doing to the climate change and how the academic arena is also addressing the climate change. And now let's look at how North Korea is responding to the climate change globally. North Korea joined the UNFCCC in 1994 and also
유엔에 제출했고요.
it submitted
작년에
the
2021년도에는 이제 지속가능 발전 2030 의제 달성에
DPRK Voluntary National Review
하는 것을 제출한 바 있습니다.
to the UN in 2021.
국제사회에서
And it also submitted the NDC to the UN in 2006 and 2019 as well. As for the Voluntary National Review, it is about how North Korea hopes to achieve the SDGs. And in this FVNR, Voluntary National Review, what's interesting is that the NDC, the targets there was quite higher compared to the NDC submitted to the 2016 UNFCCC. And what's interesting is that North Korea did not include the baseline for reducing the carbon emissions. They simply said that they're going to reduce like 50%, but they did not explain compared to which year. But they said that anyways, in this VNR, North Korea said they are going to reduce these carbon emissions by 15.63% by 2030. And they said that they're going to reduce the emissions by 50.34% as long as there are international aid. And next, I'd like to explain how we could conduct the cooperative measures for the climate responses. Well, North Korea launched missiles recently, and there are some concerns that the seventh missile nuclear test is imminent. But I cautiously believe that maybe there could be some breakthrough in the inter-Korean relations as long as they don't conduct the nuclear test. And if we do decide to go on with the environmental cooperations, then we have to think about what we have to do. I think that we have to focus on the initiatives that we have agreed upon in the past. For example, in 2007, we had the Inter-Korean Environmental Protection Collaboration Subcommittee, and also the health. It's also the Inter-Korean Healthcare and Environmental Protection Subcommittee, and maybe we could tap onto that. And we also had a Inter-Korean Meteorological Cooperation related working group meeting, so we could resume that and restore this mechanism as we move forward. Also, there could be some rooms for multilateral cooperation. We failed on the six-party talks, but if you look at the East Asian countries, they are focusing on carbon neutrality and reducing the greenhouse gas emissions.
상당한 좀 합의들은 있다라고 생각이 듭니다.
So there seems to be some consensus among the East Asian countries because Japan also announced the carbon neutrality by 2050 and China announced 2016 as zero, and Russia, I'm not sure whether they have announced that, but I understand that they are going in that direction. And North Korea too also submitted the VNR report, as I said, so they are quite active in responding to climate change.
이러한 그 국가들 간의 이런 공통점들이
Having this in
많은
mind, with these kind of similar approaches to the climate change, we believe that the cooperative mechanism amongst the East Asian countries to respond to climate crisis could help us reduce the military tensions.
사실 이런 협력에서 가장 보다 중요한 건
But what's really important is North Korea's willingness to take part in the international community. Because only then could we move beyond a one-off cooperation mechanism and continue on with a more sustainable cooperation. And we need to do some work internally as well. North Korea's VNR said, well, in North Korea's national development goals, so the national development goals are linking these international goals with their domestic goals, and we have to look through all of these specific national NDGs to really meet the demands and needs of North Korea.
특히 또 한 가지는 이제 한국에서도 이제 남북한의 협력들을 조금
Also, I believe that in South Korea as well, we need to focus on the environmental areas as we pursue the inter-Korean cooperation. We shouldn't simply focus on development cooperation, or rather, we need to focus on a more sustainable development part of the inter-Korean cooperation. I hope that the Unification Ministry and politicians take note of this as well. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Now let us move on to our second presentation right away. Professor Kong, please.
네, 안녕하십니까. 공호석입니다.
Hello, I'm Kong Ho-seok. Today, I'm going to present on the biodiversity of DPRK and sustainable development. So if you could refer to page 19 of the booklet, this is the table of content, why we have to focus on North Korea and their situation of biodiversity and deforestation, climate change and ecosystem status, and closing remarks. So why do we have to pay attention to North Korea? I believe that this really needs no explanation, but the problem is our attention toward North Korea is disproportionately focused on certain aspects, politics, military aspects, and economics, and we know less about any climate change issues or biodiversity statuses in North Korea. In particular, when it comes to forest reforestation or biodiversity, if we were to achieve reunification, it would take much more time, effort, and money to restore that, and it requires further attention and management, so this is something that we do have to focus on over the long term. And it is also important, not only for North Korea, but also for us to maintain the natural ecosystem on the Korean Peninsula to brace for climate change, reunification, and it's also a matter of survival. But you all well know that there are limitations in researching into North Korea. For instance, they are very reluctant to disclose any information about themselves, not just the environment and ecosystem. So we have insufficient data, as well as a closed-off aspect of their database. And there's also credibility issues regarding the details that they do disclose. And the literature in Korea, the little of it, is scattered in different locations, so we don't have enough literature to go off of to create a storyline. And fundamentally, the fundamental problem is that the slide, the deck, has to be much
남북 간의 과학적인 관심사가
there is a very
이제 좀
big
달라서
divide
우리가
between the two
관심 가지는
Koreas in
분야에
their
대해서
scientific
북쪽에서는
interests. So
관심이
the
없다는
areas of interest
말씀이고요.
for us is not an area of
가장
interest for
결정적인
them.
것은 이러한 상황을 확인할 수
And
있는
what's
현지
also
답사가
important is
불가능하다는 사실입니다.
it's
it's
impossible to host any on-site surveys in North Korea.
생물다양성과
So out of these various topics, I hope to talk about biodiversity and forest vegetation. If you see this diagram here, it's one of the images featured in their textbook. It's very detailed, the map, and the distribution of vegetation on the Korean peninsula. So they do have this very structured, organized information, but we don't have that much information on where this information came from. And just like the head of the center, Mr. Kang, mentioned, we decided to jointly start an analysis into North Korea's biodiversity. And as you can see here, we tried to collect available data on the Korean Peninsula, what we had access to update and wrap our mind around the biodiversity status in North Korea. We also tried to research into the plant vegetation biodiversity on North Korea, and since the details are very technical, I will just skip that part. And among the information, especially the species that are on the verge of extinction, we paid extra attention to them as we conducted our analysis. And there are forests or a group of vegetations that feature different types of species. We also analyzed them. And as for animals, we analyzed which animal species existed there and how many of them were at the verge of extinction, depending on the category and the risk of extinction, starting from mammals to amphibians and also reptiles. So this has to do with not just biodiversity itself, but I think we have to take to heart this issue of deforestation. In 2012, there was an international conference at the Third World, and this was the information that was discussed there. Up until then, when we asked any questions about deforestation in North Korea, they said that there were no issues whatsoever. But this was the point when we started to really take this issue seriously, their deforestation issue seriously. The red line shows how the wooded area in North Korea is declining, and reversely, the denuded area is increasing.
그런데 실제 이제 이런 것들이 어떤 부작용을 가져오느냐?
So we have to take a look at which side effects these phenomena are bringing. It can be various views, but it directly triggers, it has to directly do with climate change. So this map, the areas in red indicate the areas where the surface area of forests dramatically shrunk, and also the accumulated amount of logs have reduced. So the reason for this very severe deforestation is because due to the extreme food shortage and energy shortage and the economic difficulties, they try to export logs and wood to offset that, and the insects and pests, everything on top of one another, led to a very vicious cycle. And just like I mentioned earlier, what came down to all of this, the fundamental reason for all of it was food and energy shortage and famine. And that's because, and they tried to respond to this shortage by reclaiming their land and their forests. And also the North Korean authorities ordered that they carry out more logging and illegal cutting activities, which led to floods. And this flooded the farmland also. And the inundation and the famine and other natural disasters stacked on top of each other and led to this very tragic impact. This is the outcome of our analysis. And on the next page, this is what they said on the global platform. They said the population increased, and this led to an increase in demand for wood and firewood and food, and the land was damaged, and deforestation occurred, and the ecosystem was also damaged, and as a result of that, this impacted the livelihood of their people. This was their analysis. But likewise, they did admit that there was inappropriate land use and a subsequent impact from that. So they partially admitted that there was a problem here. And as a result, we are seeing that deforestation is aggravating climate change as well. So if you see here in the border area around the Amlok River, over the past 100 years, there was an average temperature increase of 3.1 degrees. That's about threefold the global average. And this is also about twice the average temperature increase in South Korea or our metropolitan area. So over the past 100 years, they didn't see a big increase in population or urbanization, but still, their average temperature increase was much higher than South Korea's, so it's very difficult to point to a reason other than their deforestation issue. So if you see this graph, you can see the overall global trend in average temperature increase over the past century, and the blue graph is the global average, and the green line is the trend on the Korean Peninsula, the global warming trend. But you can see that we are outpacing the global trend. The graph is much steeper. And the next graph was presented at international conferences by North Korean scientists in 2014. And starting from 1928, to 2013, it shows the time frame between, and on the Korean Peninsula, the average increase was about 1.9 degrees Celsius, which is much higher than China's 0.4 degrees and Japan's 1.1 degrees. And during the same period, the global trend was 0.6 degrees. So we can see that the increase on the Korean Peninsula is much higher. In particular, from 1998 to 2009, there was a very severe heat wave, and the increase in average temperature was much more notable. So we can conclude that we are going through a lot of side effects from this global warming. But the problem is even more severe in North Korea because they don't have the appropriate social infrastructure to respond to that. So if you see here, their mountainous areas in particular is very vulnerable to these changes, and this again is impacting the ecosystem. So one problem is leading to another problem. So it's not a linear structure, but a very multifaceted, interconnected challenge. And I think that's why it carries more risk. And it also has to do with famine, food shortage issues, and energy issues, and healthcare, and other hygiene issues sometimes. This could lead to an unpredicted, very abnormal situation. I can say that there is enough potential for that to happen. So I would like to say that even though not many people are interested in this issue, we have to pay attention to global warming in North Korea, because if this continues, there's going to be a very tragic impact on their ecosystem. I'm researching into this topic also. And in South Korea, there is no mountain area that stretches for more than 2,000 kilometers. But in North Korea, there's about 60 to 70 of those areas, especially in the Baekdu-san mountain areas. It's very concentrated in that region. And if the average temperature increases, there will be some species that find it more favorable, but the tragic impact would lie in other vulnerable areas, vulnerable species that would be directly impacted by this increase in temperature. And just like I mentioned at the outset, this is very much a very low priority for the North Korean authorities and also for South Koreans. So I think North Korean scientists would have to focus more on this issue. But they believe that this is something that they can't really, it's not really feasible for them to work on. So this problem of biodiversity loss is very severe. So my conclusion is this damage of natural ecosystem in the North Korean region and the extinction of the species, once it starts officially, it would be irreversible. So for instance, reforestation or climate change or food issues, these issues might be solved once we achieve reunification if we invest enough money and time. But once a certain number of species or biodiversity is lost, there's no way of turning that back. So even if it isn't really an immediate priority now, we do have to focus place a greater focus on these issues. And we have to take to heart the issue of the vulnerable ecosystem, especially the alpine latitude and subalpine belt. And that's the area that I'm looking into in my research. And regarding wetland, I'm sure Dr. Choi would be able to elaborate on that in her next speech. And this problem is a current issue for North Korea, but considering the longer time frame when we achieve reunification, it's going to be a very important natural asset for us as well. So we really need sustainable attention on this. So regardless of the level of attention and the current priority, we still have to focus on these issues, their biodiversity, their reforestation, prevention of natural disasters, and the subsequent energy and food shortage, famine and hunger. Everything is interconnected. So one cause could lead to multiple tragic effects. And these days, recently, climate change is a very important global agenda. So regarding this, we have to share information with North Korea and facilitate exchange and cooperation and focus on what we can do to resolve this challenge right now. However, in reality, there are many challenges that hold us back from addressing these problems. So for now, we have to try and think of non-military, non-economic efforts that we can put in. And although it's not related to military or the economy, it's a theme that's very important for us both, and it carries less pressure. It's a less heavier topic. So I think we have to focus on what we can do internally to resolve this challenge. So I would like to conclude there. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Professor Kong. As a person who majored in politics, I also classified my research into North Korea as higher politics, but I realized today that there are just as important topics in the low politics area as well. Next, Professor Choi, please.
Hello, as introduced, I am Hyun-Ah from Han-Style Foundation Korea. Some may know about our foundation and some may be quite unfamiliar with the foundation, but we are an NGO from Germany. As Professor Kang just said, North
저희가
Korea is
약간은
trying
도움을
to,
주고 있는 부분이 있습니다.
we are helping North Korea to come into the international community.
기후변화로 인한 피해 종에 대한 관심이 필요하다고 말씀을
Also,
해주셨는데
Professor
그
Kang
부분에도
said we
북한의
have to
관심을 이끌기 위해서 노력을 하고 있고요.
focus on the damages that
많은
climate change is
분들이
posing
강릉
on
국립공원에 가면
North Korea,
흑락새를
and
볼
we
수
are focusing
있다라고
on that as
과거에는
well.
생각을
And
하셨고
a lot of people
있는데
said that
최근에는
they could see the migratory birds in North Korea, but that is not the case
의견이
anymore.
많고요. 그런데 북한에 가면 볼
Or
수
rather,
있다라는 의견이
that bird
있습니다.
was not visible in Korea,
그런
but
측면에서
that is visible in North Korea.
북한에 어떻게 보면은 다양한 생물종이 멸종 위기종이 있을 수도 있고 그 이유 중에 하나가 저희와는
In
다른
North Korea, there could be lots of
자연 환경을
endangered
가지고 있어서
species,
진행되는
but
부분,
because
관측이 되는
their
부분이
environmental
있습니다.
situations are
그런 부분
different from
측면에서
us,
저는
they still have some
산림 분야에
endangered
대해서는
species
이미
in Korea appearing
교수님께서
there.
말씀해 주셨고 또 하나 중요한 기후 변화 측면에서 그리고 기후 대응 측면에서
And I think
중요한
one important part
주제인
of the
습지와
climate change
관련된
and climate
내용을
response is
말씀을 드리도록
wetlands. So
하겠습니다.
let me move on to the wetland
그중에서도
conservation.
해양 생태계, 해양 습지에 관련된 부분 그리고
I'll
이
focus
습지 보전을
on
통해서
the
우리가 어떻게 하면
marine
북한과
ecosystem
좀더
and how to conserve this marine ecosystem and how we can focus on the wetland conservation to promote the
이에
inter-Korean
앞서서 개인적으로
cooperation.
아까 공 교수님께서 마지막에 말씀하셨던 비정치적이고 군사적이고
Also, Professor
그러면서
Kang said that we need to
조금은
move toward
접근이
a
우리 공동의
non-political or
아젠다로 접근이 필요한
non-militarical
부분이기 때문에
aspect of
2017년도
cooperation.
9월에
And I agree
아시겠지만
with that.
북한에서 제6차 핵실험이 있었습니다.
In
그 당시에
2017 September, there was a nuclear test in North Korea.
전문가를 포함한 국제사회 전문가와 함께
Back then in Vietnam,
수정 관련된
the
논의를 했었습니다.
experts of both North Korea and South
북한이
Korea
실제
talked
핵실험을
about
하고
water
있는
resources.
상황에서도
It was when the
비정치적이고
North Korean nuclear
군사적이지 않은
test was being
분야에서
conducted,
어떻게
but
하면
still
우리가 수전
the experts
협력을
of
할 수
the
있는지,
non-political
수전
areas
분야에서
got
협력을 할 수
together to
있는지,
talk about
넓게
how
보면
best to
환경 협력을 할 수
promote the
있는지
cooperation in
하는
water
그런 사례라고
resources and
보여지고요.
environmental
저 또한 그 자리에
protection.
참석을
And I
했었는데
was also
그런
in that
부분이
gathering.
오늘 이 논의를 시작점으로 해서 남북 관계 그리고 북한이 어떻게 보면 7차 핵실험을 준비하고
So
있을 수도 있고
North
아닐
Korea
수도
may
있지만
now be preparing
그런
for the
상황에서
seventh nuclear test or
좀
not,
더 다양한
but I believe
협력이
those
필요한
kind of
상황에서
best practice
봐주셨으면
case
하고요.
can be a referral point.
제 발표 내용은 이미 기후변화 관련된 부분을 많이 말씀해 주셨기
And
때문에
because
그런 부분
previous
약간과
speakers
그리고
focused
북한의
on the
생태
climate
협력 수요
changes, I'll skim over
북한에서
them.
이런
And then I'll talk
부분에서
about
필요하다라고
how
직접적으로
the
국제사회
eco-cooperation
또는
demands
저희
lies in North Korea.
쪽에 언급한 부분도 있고 그렇지 않은 부분도 있습니다. 그러나 대외 활동 그리고 대내외
I'll talk
활동
about
측면에서 북한의 실제
how North Korea
적극적으로
is
참여하는 부분을 보고 그들이
focusing
필요하는
their
부분이
domestic
무엇이다라는
and
측면에서
international
말씀을 드리고요.
activities
그러면서
regarding
어떤 협력을 할 수
eco-cooperation.
있는지 부분에 대해서 말씀을
And
드리도록
I'll
하겠습니다.
explain further about the specific
기후변화에 대한
cooperation
부분은 이미
measures.
다 아시는 부분이고 그리고
As for the
소개가
climate
됐기 때문에 살짝
change, I
넘어가지만
will like to skim
2015년도에 지금
over, as
사진에서
many people have said, but as you can see here, in 2015,
왼쪽이 그 2015년 라선 그 홍수 피해 있기 전입니다.
the left part was
그리고
before
오른쪽이
the flood damage
홍수
happened in
피해를
Nasan,
입고 난
and the right part
상황인데요.
was how the
저렇게
flood happened.
황폐 지역이라고
After the flood
표현하시는데
happened.
산림
You can see that the
지역에서
region was
또 주민들이
devastated.
거주하는 지역에서 직접적인 자연재해,
You can see that
산사태의
the
영향을
residential
받았고요.
area was
이를
directly
복구하기
affected
위해서
by avalanches.
북측에서는 2017년도에 완벽하게
In
복구했다라고
2017,
언급을
North
하고
Korean
발표도
government
했지만
reported that this area was
실제적으로는
completely
나지
restored.
상태의 그냥
But
집만
actually,
만들어진
in this area,
상황입니다.
there
그렇기
are
때문에
just
실제로 저희가 추후에
some structures of
산림을
homes.
포함한 또는 기후변화 영향으로 인한 홍수라던가 자연재해 피해를
So,
북쪽에서 복구를 할 때 어떤
we have
도움을 줄 수
to
있는지에 대한 연구도
focus
필요하다고
more
생각이
on
되고요.
how we can provide
또
assistance when
하나는
North Korea
탄소수험 측면에서
restores the
해양습지
effects of climate
그리고 저희가 오늘
change.
부산에 와 있는데 경남연구원도
And,
있고 부산연구원도 있고
well, in
여기
Busan, there are
KMI도
lots of
있지
research
않습니까?
institutes and
해양 생태계의
KMIs,
중요성은
and
계속해서
we have
언급되고
to
있습니다.
continue to
블루카본
understand the importance
측면에서
of marine ecosystem, as
이
many
해안
have been correctly
생태계를
pointed out.
해안 습지를 어떻게 보존해야
We need
될지
to
이런 부분에
preserve
대해서
the
저희가 다시
marine
한번
ecosystem because they are
생각해야
the
될
carbon
필요가 있고요.
sinkages.
작년에 2021년도에
And in
한국의 갯벌이 세계
2021,
자연유산으로
Korea's
등재됐습니다.
mudflat was
갯벌의
designated
가장
as the
중요한 역할 중에
international
하나가 탄소 흡선으로서 역할이고 그 부분이
heritage
북한에도
because the
적용되는 부분이
mudflat
있습니다.
is a very important
그렇기
carbon
때문에
sink,
저희가
and
협력할
North
때
Korean wetlands could serve
생태계
as
습지
those
보본을 놓칠 수가
important
없는데요.
carbon sink.
북한에서도 그 해양 생태계에 관련된 부분 그리고 기후 변화와 관련된
In
부분,
in
당연히
North
산림에
Korea
관련된
as
부분도
well,
포함이 되어 있습니다.
They are
그러면서 어떻게
focusing
하면
on
국제사회와
the
협력할 수 있는지에
various
대해서
areas that the
노력을
wetlands
하고
can
있고
contribute to,
적극적으로 참여를 하고
and they
있습니다.
are actually
저희가
participating very
판단하는
actively in
바로는
the international community's activities. Based on what
15년
we
이후
understand,
김정은
after
집권
2015,
이후로 더
after
활발하게
Kim
진행하고
Jong-un first took
있다라고
office,
알고
these
있고요.
activities have scaled up.
대표적으로 아시는 것처럼 인천
And as
송도에
you all
기반을
know,
두고
in
있는
Incheon, Songdo
녹색
area,
기후
the
기후금 그리고
GCF
동아시아 대양주 철새
and
이동
also
경로
the
파트너십에 가입을 한
EAFP
상태입니다.
were some of the institutions that North Korea took part
IUCN
in,
세계
and also
대양 보전
in
연맹
the
앞서 공석 박사님이
IUCN,
말씀해 주신
as Professor
북한의
Kong
레드
said,
리스트라던가 세계
the red list of North
자연유산에
Korea,
대한 부분들에 대해서 검토를
and
하고 있는
also
세계
the
자연
natural
보전 연맹에
heritages or natural heritage
국토환경보전, 우리나라로
conservation
하면
office
환경보호 또는 국가
are some of
국토부 역할을 하고
the
있는
areas that North Korea is focusing on as well.
국토환경보호청이
The
국가기관으로
IUCN
2017년도에
designated North Korea's Ministry of
지금
Land,
현재 인천
Environment
송도에
and
다시
Protection
저희가 유치한
as
기후
an
기술
official
네트워크에도
government agency.
환경
In
정과적 평가 기술에
2017,
대한
and also in
부분을 요청한 바
2017,
있습니다.
North Korea requested the CTCN
2021년도에
to
아시는 것처럼
do a technology
SDG
transfer
보고서를
of
발간을 했고요.
ELCA.
북한에서의 노력은 어느 정도 그리고 국제사회에서 입증할 만한 과학적인
And North
데이터를 바탕으로
Korea's
진행되는
efforts
부분이
are
있습니다.
based on
그러나
data-driven
공석 교수님께서 말씀하셨던
activities.
것처럼 그 부분을
But
그러니까
as Professor
과학적으로 북한에서
Kong said,
진행하는 과학적인 연구에
these
대한
scientific
신뢰성을 저희가
researches
얼마만큼
may not be quite
보장을 하고
reliable.
인정을 할
We may
때에
not be able to
대해서는
guarantee the
논의가 필요합니다.
reliability of these
북한에서
researches.
발간한 레드리스트만 보더라도
The red list
2014년도와
announced by North
16년도에
Korea in
그
2014 and
기준이
2016, their
조금씩 차이가
criteria
있습니다.
differed.
연구자에 따라
And
그
that
제시한 기준이
criteria
차일 수도
may
있지만
be different
국가
because
단위
the researchers were
보고서에도
different, but
약간씩 차이가
also
있기 때문에 그 부분을 저희가
the
얼마만큼
overall
신뢰성을
criteria are
가지고
different for the
그리고
national report
국제사회와
as well. So
그리고
we need to
앞으로 또
understand
기후변화
how
대응
reliable
기후
they are.
데이터를
We need to
이용하고
take in
분석하는
mind
측면에서
when
어떻게
we,
노력을
the
해야 되는지
researchers
부분에
and the
대해서
global
검토가
community
필요하다고 생각이
works on
되고요.
that.
제 발표 자료에 넣지는 않았지만
And this is not part of our
북한에서도
presentation material, but
5S
in
기술이라고
North
했는데
Korea
저희가
they
쓰고
have
있는
the
GIS,
5S technology,
GPS,
which is quite like the
위성
GIS
영상에 대한 부분,
and
그리고 모델링에 대한
geospatial
부분도 계속해서
information and
검토를 하고
modeling
있고 관련
information.
기술을 습득하기
So
위해서
North Korea
노력을
is
하고
working
있습니다.
a lot
한예로 저희가
to
지원하고
acquire
있는
such
과학
geographical
사업에도
information.
북한
For
전문가가
example,
참여를
in
하면서
our research
2019년부터
project,
독일에서
a North Korean official
관련된
took
그냥 사회
part.
관련된
So
모델링
in
관련된 부분에
Germany,
대해서 학습을
they
하고 있는
have been
상황입니다.
learning a lot about the forestation
지금 제가 앞서
modeling.
말씀드린 그 북한에서 가입하고 또 국제사회하고
So I told you
협력하고
about how
활동은
North Korea is
단순한
participating in the international organization activities, and these were not just one-off
2014년
events.
습지 같은 경우는
In
산림 같은 그
2014,
전이겠지만 습지 분야 특히나
in
조류조사
particular
관련된
for
부분이
the
2014년부터
bird
지속된
surveys,
결과입니다.
these kind of global activities
유네스캅이라던가
happened from
EFP,
2014.
IUCN, 저희
UNESCO,
같은 국제 NGO,
EFP,
그리고
and
버드와
IUCN, and HSF, and other international
다양한
organizations
기관과
like
전문가들이 함께
WWF
하면서
Hong
북한
Kong. These are
전문가에
all of the
대한
international organizations
교육과
that North Korea
국내외
have been
연수,
working with.
외
So they have been doing
연수에는
the global
베트남이라든가
and domestic
캄보디아
training
또
programs
독일
where the
관련된
Vietnam,
독일
Cambodia,
쪽, 유럽 쪽
and
연수도
Germany
포함이 되어
and
있고요. 그러면서 북한
European
현지에서의
experts took
연수도
part.
포함이 되어
And
있습니다.
also
국외
these kind of
전문가들이
programs
직접
include
가서
the
현장에서
experts
조사를
going to
하고
North Korea
그
to do an
조사한
actual
결과를
on-site
다시
survey
논의하고
where they could discuss
발표하는 그런
and
자리를
present on the
갖고
results
있는데요.
in North Korea
대표적으로 그
themselves.
북한의 습지 목록 우리나라
So for example, North Korea has a wetlands report or list.
생물자원관에서
And
조사한 그런 기록들,
these kind
연구자가
of
조사한 기록들처럼
reports
북한에서도 국가 습지 목록을
by
발간했습니다.
or
그게
compiled by the North Korean government
1997년도
was
조선대학교
announced.
정종렬 교수님 팀하고
In
97년도에 발간한 이후에 약
1997,
20여 년
this
만에
list was first announced, and in
2018년도에
20 years,
제2차
in
개정판을 발간을 했습니다.
2008, the revised version
북한
was
전체
announced.
습지에 대한
This
내용이 들어가
included
있고요.
all the wetlands in North Korea,
그러면서 위성
and
기반이라든가
also they included the satellite-based data and GIS
분석도 포함되어 있습니다.
data-based
이러한
analysis
내용들이
as well.
다시 2018년도 람사르
And
담사국 총회에서
all of
사이드
these
이벤트를
data
개최하면서 국제사회와
were
같이
utilized or presented in
공론을
Ramsar side
그때 저희
effects
재단을 포함한
in
국제기구들이 같이
2018.
했습니다.
Back then,
국제기구
we at the
안에는
HSF
저희
and
한국적
international
전문가
organizations all
기관들도
took
포함이 되어 있고요.
part, and
그렇기 때문에 지금 이번 달이죠. 다음 주에 지금 남사르
just next
당사국
week,
총회가 14차
the
당사국 총회가
Ramsar
제네바에 있습니다.
COP14 will take place in Geneva,
여전히
and we're
알
still
수가
not sure whether the
없지만
North Korean
이때
delegation will
2018년도에
take
했던
part.
분들이 다시
But
한번 모여서
we expect that people who
이때는 좀더
participated in
황해 사회 보전에 대한
2018
내용을
will come
논의할
together again
예정입니다.
to talk about
그렇기
the Yellow
때문에
Sea
그런
and
측면에서
West
저희가
Sea
앞으로
conservation efforts.
이번 달에 있는 뭐 기후변화
And
당사국 총회
this
또 다음
month we're
달에
going to
있는 생물
have the
다양성 협약에 대한
UNFCCC
당사국 총회
conference
이런
or
국제 회의들이
COP
계속 있습니다.
conference,
이때 북한
and we're also going to
대표단의
have other
참여
global
여부는
conferences.
지금 북한의
And
공세하고도
we
연결이
are
되어
not
있지만
sure whether North Korean
그분들의
delegates are going
온라인
to take part
참여도
because
검토할 수 있는
there are
부분이고
some
그에 대해서는
measures
아마
within North
오늘
Korea,
토론자를 참석하시는
but
분들께서
maybe
많은
they could
의견을 주실
participate
것이라고 생각이
online,
됩니다.
and I look forward to many of the
북한에
discussants,
대한
comments on
북한의
this
활동은
area
좀 더
as well.
전지구적인 차원,
And North
글로벌
Korea's
협력
activities
측면에서 접근하는 부분이 큽니다.
have been quite globally
보셨을 수도
focused.
있는데요.
And you may
2019년도에
have already,
GCF의 국가지정기구를
you
지정을
are
하고 연락
maybe already
담당자로
familiar with this,
국토환경보전
but
대협조구 담당자가
they have
지정됐습니다.
in 2019
그러면서
North Korea
처음으로 레드니스 프로젝트 즉
or rather
협력병 사업을
GCF
FA와 같이 제안을 했고요.
approved the
이게
readiness
GCF에서
projects.
승인된 바 있습니다.
And
그러나 실제 사업의
the
이행은
North Korea's Ministry of
대북 제재,
Land,
국제사회 대북
Environment
제재에
and
인해서
Protection
특히나
was
이 레드니스
designated as
프로젝트
the
안의 대부분의
NDA
관료에
of the
대한
GCF.
고위급 관계자에 대한 능력병 사업이 들어가 있기
But
때문에
this readiness
실제 이행
proposal
현재
is
보유된
mostly regarding the
상태입니다.
high-level
그렇기
officials of North
저희가
Korea, and that is
향후에
why the
북한
actual
전문가
implementation is
교류
quite
협력 사업을
limited.
진행을 할
But
때
as we move forward, when you do a
인적
lot of
교류
cooperative
측면에서 할 때
projects, especially
연구자
regarding the
중심의
inter-Korean
실제 현장
human
중심, 현장 조사
exchanges,
중심에 접근하는
we
것도
would have to
필요하지
focus more
않나라는
on the
의견을 드리고요.
researchers-based and the
또
on-site
하나는
survey-based
CTCN의
projects. Also,
2017년도에
in
김일성
2017,
국가대학, 김일성 종합대학과
regarding the
국가과학기술위원회에서
the State Commission of
제안을
Science and
했습니다. 여기도
Technology
전과적
and the
영양평가에
Kim Il-sung
대한
University made a
교육을,
request
인적 교류를 능력평
for
사업을 하고
a training
싶다라는
program
또한
for
기술 이전
and
요청이 들어가
capacity
있습니다. 이런
building
부분을
and
보면
the technology
북한 회사에서
transfer
원하는 기후
regarding the
기술이 분명히
ELCA. So we
있고요.
can see that
그
North Korea
안에
has a specific
저희가 오늘
technology
논의하고 있는
or
습지라던가 산림,
areas in
생물다양성
mind,
보전 측면에서
and that
접근하는
includes the
부분도 검토가
wetland
되어야 될
and
것이라고 생각이
conservation
됩니다.
parts as well.
또 하나는 지역적 차원의 논의가
And
가능하다고 생각이 됩니다.
another thing I believe
2017년부터 서해
is
황해
possible is
보전을 위한
regional level
워킹그룹
discussions.
활동이
Recently,
해수부,
there was the working group
환경부,
activities
그리고
for
북한
Shanghai
국토환경보성 중국적 환경부 해수부
natural
관계자분들이 참여를
environment
하면서
preservation
기구
with the
NGO들,
authorities
연구자들이
from
참여를 하면서 지속적으로 논의되고
North Korea
있습니다.
and China,
각
and it
국가
has become
대표단에서
a
관련돼서
forum
우리가
with
습지
very
보전을
active
위해서 어떤
participating
해양
researchers.
습지라든가 내륙
And I
습지
think we have
관련된 해양
to
습지
also
관련된
put our heads together
어떤
to
노력을 해야 되는지 어떤 관리 체계를 하고 있는지 이런 부분에 대해서
which efforts
논의가
are
진행이
necessary
되고 있고요.
for
코로나
wetland
상황
preservation,
있기
and those
전에
efforts are also
2019년까지
ongoing.
활발하게
Before
진행됐습니다.
COVID broke
이때
out until
순천에
2019, the
위치하고
efforts
있는
were very
RRCI,
active.
동아시아 람사르 지역센터가
The
같이
East
연수
Asia
능력병 사업도
Ramsar
진행을 했습니다.
Regional
그랬을 때
Forum
북한
located
대표단을
in
포함한
Suncheon
전문가들이 실제
brought
해양
together
습지,
many
특히나
experts from
람사르
North
습지로
Korea
지정된 곳
and
또는
South
유네스코
Korea,
세계
and
유산을
we
지정된 곳에
researched
답사를
into
하면서
paid site
어떻게
visits
조사를
to
하고
lands that are designated
과학적으로
as
접근할
preservation
수
sites
있는지 이런 부분에
and
대한 논의가 진행된 바
discussed
있습니다.
which approaches should be taken for effective preservation. And our goal is to bring discussion online.
좀더 기간이 필요한
And as for
부분이
the more specific
그리고 북한
details, I
자체도
think it would
국가
be sorted
차원의
out in a matter
노력을 하고
of time.
있습니다.
And the
2018년도
North Korea,
IUCN도 EFP에
at their national
가입을
level,
하고
is
람사르 습지를
making their
문덕가라서
efforts as well.
람사르 습지
They joined the
문덕가
Ramsar
분야,
COP in 2018 and
동아시아
the
대학 철새
AAFP
이동
also,
경로는 거점 서식지로
and
지정을 하면서
they have designated
서식지를
key
이용하는
spots as a
철새들의
habitat of
중요성을
world migratory
인식하고
birds.
세계 철새
They're realizing the
매년
importance of
5월과
protecting
10월
these
둘째 주
migratory
토요일에 있는 이
birds
행사에
and
적극적으로 참여를 하고
are
있습니다.
participating in the World Migratory Birds
2019년에는
Day
저희가
after designating it
국토환경보전과
officially.
같이 물개리 축제
With
문덕
their
람사르
Ministry
습지,
of
문덕
Environment, we had the
동아시아
festival
대학교 철새
in
이동 경로
Mundok
거점 서식지에서
Ramsar
관련 행사를 했고요.
and also events
이것이
related
어떻게
to
보면
the key
지속가능한
habitats of
교류
migratory
협력
birds.
그리고
I think
관광으로도
this
이어질
goes
수
to
있는
show
부분이라고
how
생각이 되고요.
important
그리고
Korean
이
cooperation
이후에는
is and how that
2021년 그리고
also can
올해도
extend
당연히
into tourism.
EFP와 같이 세계
Cooperation in
철새나
tourism.
기념을 하면서 보시는
This year, we
것처럼
will also commemorate
언어로
the
각국의
World
언어로 세계
Migratory
철새날에
Bird
대한 부분
with
새를 위해서 불을
EAAFP. We
꺼주세요라는 행사를 같이
translated
동참한 바
the phrase
있습니다.
into different
그리고
languages
많은
and
것과 달리
participated in this
북한에서도
campaign together.
적극적으로 참여하고 있는 부분.
Unlike what
그러나
we
이것이
expect, North
국가
Korea is also
단위에서
enthusiastically
진행되는 부분,
participating in
이
these
저희와 좀 다른 부분이
efforts
있습니다.
at the
개인
national
연구자가
level.
추진하는 부분,
So there are
그리고 개인
individual
연구자로서는
level efforts put in by
연구단체로서
researchers and
오늘
at
이
the
회의를
group
주선한
level by
주최한
each
국가전략
community,
HK 국가전략사업단이라던가
such as the International
국제관계
Area
연구원이
Studies HK
연구하고는
National
또
Strategies
회의에서
Research
진행하고 있는
and so
연구하고는
forth.
약간씩 차이가 있기
The
때문에
nature
이
of the
차이를
research projects
연구자들
could be
입장에서
slightly
어떻게 좁힐
different from those
것인지
put forth
이에
by
대한
KEI
논의도
and
저희가
others.
필요하다라고
And I
생각이
think
듭니다.
now we have to talk about how we can
그리고
narrow
많은
down this
분들이 아실 수도
difference.
있는데요. 북한에서도
Some of you may
정기적으로
know that
대외
North
홍보
Korea is
매체를
also
통해서 북한에서
regularly
진행하고 있는 연구
publishing
사업에 대한 결과물을
literature
홍보하고
on their
있습니다.
research projects.
대표적으로 월간 조선이 있는데요.
So
국영문,
one
러시아어
case in
그리고
point is
중국어까지도
monthly
발간이 되고
Chosun.
있습니다.
They're translating it to
이때
English, Russian,
과거하고는 달리
Chinese.
과거라고 하면 2015년 전과 달리
And compared to the past or before
최근에는 해양 습지에
2015,
대한 중요성
recently
그때
they are highlighting the
북한
importance of maritime
동서
wetlands
발견된 조류
and
서식지에 대한
the
부분들,
bird
번식지의
habitats of rare
중요성들을 계속
species
언급을
along the
하면서
coastlines
북한에서는
or east and west coastlines of the Korean Peninsula.
특히나 습지 생태계가
North Korea
매우
believes that maritime
높은 가치가
ecosystems,
있다. 이런
especially
부분을
wetlands,
홍보 또는
are
알리고
very
있는 상황입니다.
valuable, so they're trying to promote
그리고
that
그러면서도
spirit
문덕
as much
철새
as they
보고에
can.
대한 내용들
And
그리고
at the same time, they're promoting the Bundok migratory bird habitats as well.
이용하는 조류에 대한 부분들이 계속 언급이 되고 있고요.
Spreading information on the birds that are
금야 습지를 여러분도 이제
inhabiting
만약에
these
검색
habitats.
가능하시면
And recently,
찾아보실
if
수
you could
있습니다.
search the
온라인에
Kumya wetland information, you'd be
유튜브에
able to
금야 습지
see
동영상을 온라인 게재를
the
했습니다.
videos that they
우리가
posted
왜
online. They posted
습지를
it
보호해야
in
되고
February
그 습지
2022,
중요성을
and they explain why we have to protect the wetland
논의하고 있는
and
부분이
how
과거와
they're
다른
collaborating with
접근이라고
other
보여지고요.
international parties, and that's
그러면서
how it
습지 보호와 그
departs
지속적
greatly
이용에
from
대한
their past
활동들,
approach.
습지 조사와
So,
연구를 심화하고 있다라는
They're deepening
내용들이
their survey and
계속
research
언급이 되고
into wetlands,
있습니다.
and they're highlighting this time and time again.
작년에는 북한 자체적으로 생물종 목록도
Last year,
발간했다라고
they
언급이 되고
also
있습니다.
published
자료
their
확보는
own
저희가 아직
national list of
어렵지만 추후
species.
자료가 확보되면
Although we
많은
do not have
연구자분들과
enough information on this, if we
공유할
could lay our
예정이
hands
있고요.
on it, we will share it with other
이렇듯 북한에서의
researchers in the
관심이
future.
산림에서는 기본적으로 분명히
And
있고요. 그
we can see that
플러스
the North
습지
Korean
생태계
people are
보호에 대한
definitely
부분들이
interested in
계속
forests and
논의되고
also
있습니다.
in
그런데 아시는
wetland
것처럼
protection.
북한에서는
But
유일하게
as
간척
all
사업이
of you
진행되고
know,
있는 국가입니다.
North Korea is the only
알고
country that are
있지만
still
그
conducting
반면에
reclamation,
그
land
간척
reclamation projects.
사업지로 이용되고 있는 습지, 해안
And the
습지의
wetlands
중요성도
that have
언급하고 있기
become
때문에
subject
이
to these
부분에
projects
우리가
are
새만금 사업에
going through a
대해서
critical time, and
논의를
they're
하고
trying to
어떻게
bring
보건에
attention
대한
to this problem
보건할 수 있는 이런 부분에 계속
and
논의하고
also raise
있듯이
awareness on how international
북한에서도 습지
discussions
생태계, 생물다양성,
and
기후변화
efforts
대응,
are
산림
required
생태계에 대한
to
중요성을
combat
계속
this.
알고 있고
So North Korea is
이해하려고
definitely
노력을
aware
하지만
of the
그
importance of
반면에
habitats and
타
wetlands, and they're
부처에서
trying to
진행하고
act
있는
on it.
사업에서는 또
But at
다른
the same
간극이
time,
있는 점 이런 부분이
other
저희가
ministries
향후
are very
북한과
aggressively pushing forward with non-environment friendly efforts. So
남북
from the point,
환경협력을
from the
접근할
perspective
논의의
of green
부분이라고
détente,
생각이
this
됩니다.
is something that we have to
그리고
focus more on
현재
in our
북한에서는
discussions in the future.
2021년 코로나
And
봉쇄 이후에
currently, ever
2020
since the COVID-19 lockdown in 2021,
그
the
전일 수도
second half of
있는데요.
2021,
국제사회와 계속 논의를 하고 있습니다. 국가
they are
단위에서의 이런
engaging in
동아시아 해양
discussions with the
환경 관리
international
협력
community.
기구에 국가
For instance,
대표단이
they
실시간으로
sent their
참석을
delegations
해서
in real
이때
time.
우리나라
They joined the
환경
partnerships in environmental management for the seas of East Asia.
바 있습니다. 우리가 어떻게 하면
And we
해양 협력
declared
협력할 수
together,
있는지
the
이
Ministry of
부분에
Ocean and
대해서는
Fisheries
오늘 토론자를
from South
참석하시는
Korea
황경
also
박사님께서
jointly
좀더 자세히
declared
설명해 주실 것이라고
our
생각이 됩니다.
shared commitment to this cause, and I think Professor Hoang will be able to explain in detail about this later.
관련된 자료들, 거기
And
학술 자료들도 포함이
in
되어 있는데
addition
검토를
to
해봤을 때
this, when we reviewed the literature
블루카본에
regarding
대한 부분,
North
특히
Korea,
해양
we
생태계에
noticed
대한
that they were very much
부분들이
interested
계속
in
언급이 되고 있고
maritime
거기서도
ocean
습지,
ecosystems and
번식지,
blue carbon, especially
환경 보호에 대한 부분,
seabirds,
희귀종에
habitats,
대한 부분이
wetlands,
강조되고
rare
있는 부분이
species,
있습니다.
and etc.
저희가 생각하는
These were the
다양한
keywords
분야에서
that were
협력에서도
emphasized
그
very
우선적으로
much. So
검토할 수 수 있는 부분이
In our cooperation, I think we
이
can give
정치적이고
priority to these
군사적인 분야에서
keywords.
가장 빠르게 접근할 수 있는 부분이 습지
And
생태계
this
보전을
might
위한
be, the wetland
그러면서 그
preservation
습지를
agenda might be the
서식지,
most
번식지,
accessible
휴양지로
item
이용하는
among
교류
non-economic,
중심의
non-military
연구자적
agendas.
교류가
So I think we need
가능하지
more
않을까
research
싶습니다.
exchange
그러면서
in the
코로나 시기
seabirds or
저희가
wetlands
한스자이들 대단이 실제
area.
북한
And our
협력 사업
foundation
온라인 강의가 포함되어 있습니다. 북한
is conducting many cooperative projects
대표단과
with
북한 파트너
North
기관과
Korea,
실시간으로
including
온라인 강의를
online
했을 때
lectures. When we had
북한의
these
주요
real-time
관심사를
online lectures,
꼽아보면
we saw that they were
지속가능한
interested
산림
in
관련, 산림 녹화에
sustainable
대한 부분들은
forest
분명히 포함이
management,
되고요. 또 하나는
reforestation,
녹색성장에
definitely,
대한 부분입니다.
and
녹색성장,
green growth
그리고
was another
기후변화,
area of
그리고
interest.
그러면서 그린
Climate
뉴딜에 대한
change,
부분들이
and
포함이
also they
되어
were
있기 때문에
interested in the Green
향후
New Deal.
저희가 협력
So
사업을 할
in the
때
future, when we launch new
녹색성장 측면
cooperative
그리고 그
projects, I
녹색
think it
지표들을
would be a good
어떻게
idea to
이용할 수
focus on
있는지,
green
그
growth,
녹색
green
지표를
economy,
바탕으로
green indicators,
과학적인 접근이
and how to use these indicators
접근이
to
필요한지 그리고 어떤 인적
craft a
대응과
scientific
교류가
approach
필요한지에 대한
and
논의가
what sort of
가능할
human
것이라고 생각이
exchange
됩니다.
we need.
마지막으로 또 하나는 그럼 최종적으로
So
저희가
as I
실제
bring my
북한과
presentation to a
환경
close,
생태
I would
협력을
like
추진할
to
때
touch
어떻게
on
진행이
the
돼야 되느냐.
direction in which
앞서
that we should
홍석선
pursue
선생님도
in our
말씀하셨고,
eco
교수님께서도
cooperation
말씀해
with North Korea.
주셨듯이
Our other presenters have mentioned
다
that
같이 저희가 한반도
since we
중심,
share one
생태계는 계속 아시는 것처럼
peninsula,
연결돼 있고
all ecosystems are
공석
connected.
교수님께서 말씀하신
And just like
북한의
Professor
고산대,
Kong
아고산대
said,
이런
their
측면에서의
alpine and
접근도
subalpine
필요하고
areas are very
그리고
important to us
연결된
as
이
well. So
자연
we have
자원을 우리가 어떻게
to
활용할
bear
수
that in mind,
있는지
and we have to
그
think about how we can
활용이
utilize this shared
개발과
common
개발 협력
resource.
측면에서의 활용은
So I'm not talking about
분명히
development
조금은 저하되는
utilization.
부분이지만 그렇지만
That we
지속가능한
have to steer
발전
away from.
측면에서
We have to
그리고
focus more on
지속가능한 이용
sustainable
측면에서
development
어떻게 협력을
and
해야
sustainable
되는지 이런
usage
부분의
of
논의가
this
필요하다고
land.
생각이 되고요.
So I think we need further
첫 번째
discussion on this,
단계로서
and the first
저희는
step to that
저
would
또한
be
개인적으로도
something
능력배양
that
사업이라고
I'm personally interested in.
그 능력배양 사업
Capacity
안에는
building or
교육,
skill
오늘 같은
building
이런 교육 자리도
projects that
필요하고
include seminars and
국외에서의
training
연수,
like this.
국외에서의
The meeting that
연수를
we're having
바탕으로
today
저희가 실제
and
북한에 들어가는 건
invitational
어려움이 있기 때문에
training,
그 북한
we have
대표단이
trouble
다시
visiting
본국으로
North
들어갔을
Korea.
때
So when the
어떻게
North Korean
하면
delegation returned to their
현장에
land,
적용을 할 수 있는지
we have to transfer knowledge to them that they can bring back to North Korea and
해양
implement.
생태 보호 지역이라고
So
하죠. 그 해양 생태 보호 지역을 지정할
the
때
maritime
기준과
ecosystem
원칙은
designation
무엇인지
framework, we have some
기준과
standards in
원칙이
designating these
국가 단위로
regions.
적용했을 때
So
국제적
it would be
기준은
helpful for
어떻게
them if we
되는지
could
이런
share the
부분에 대한
international
교육이
standards and principles and
하나로 제시할
that
수
are
있고요.
used as
또
benchmarks in
하나는
designating
저
those
또한
areas.
대한민국
And
국적자로서
another
한스자이드
thing is,
직원으로
as a South Korean
북한
and a
관련된
member of the
남북 교류
Han-Seidel
협력을
Foundation,
국제사회
I think we
국제
need
협력을
not just
진행하면서 조금의
inter-Korean
어려움이 있습니다.
cooperation and regional
그런데
cooperation, but
협력
also
사업을
global
진행할 때 저희가
cooperation
어제부터
and
오늘까지 계속
partnerships.
교류 협력,
So
국제
yesterday and
협력은
today, over the past 2
중요한
days, we have been
요소이고
talking
중요한
again and again
역할을
about the
한다는
importance of
부분을 계속 언급을
cooperation
하고 있고 논의를
and
하고
these international
있습니다.
platforms.
전지구 차원의
So
논의와
we need
협력,
a
연대가 필요하고요.
transnational
이때 어느
global
부분이 우선시 돼야
cooperation
되는지
and
현재
solidarity.
국제 정세에서 또 현재
And we have to think
한반도
about the priorities
정책
against
측면에서
the
어떤
current
부분이
geopolitical
가능한지
backdrop
그랬을 때
and what
전지구 차원에서의
tasks are
플랫폼은 당연히
feasible. And in that regard, I think the global platform would be the Ramsar agreement or COP
어떤 부분이
events,
가능할지
and at the
그
regional
플랫폼
level,
역할을 KI가 할 수도 있고
maybe KEI could play the role as that key platform, or Hufs or Bufs. So we each have a role to play, I
남은
believe.
시간은 좀 더 저희가
And
어떻게
considering
협력하고
that,
교류할 수 있는지 이런
for the
측면에서
time we
논의가
have
되었으면
left, I
합니다.
think we
오늘 이
could
자리에서 다양한 의견을 나눌
talk
수
more
있도록
about
준비해 주신
which
많은
cooperative efforts are
관계자분들께
necessary, which
감사드립니다.
discussions are necessary in the
감사합니다.
future. Thank you very much for inviting me and listening to my speech today. Thank you.
예, 세 분 발표자분들
Thank you,
수고
everyone.
많으셨습니다.
For all the three presenters, I would like to express my gratitude. Let us move right on to the discussion.
편하게 시간 너무 구애받지 마시고요.
Please, I hope that you don't limit yourself to like 5 minutes. Make sure to just say what you want to say. I'd like to start with Professor Kang. Hello, I'm Kang Man-ok from Busan National University. I guess that many people have some vague ideas about North Korea, and they also want to know about the environmental information of North Korea, but not much of the information are disclosed. In North Korea, their water supply system and also the wastewater treatment system is not quite well established, so that could lead to waterborne diseases. And also, there are lots of natural disasters leading to the food shortages, and all this information are disclosed in the media, and that is something that we know of. But recently, there have been quite lots of talks about the climate change and deforestation and the ecosystem and the DMZ and the border and the protection of this area and the natural ecosystem. So these new topics are gaining momentum. And in this conference, we are talking about carbon neutrality and how we can focus on the supranational cooperation. Supranational cooperation would mean the cooperation through the international organizations and maybe bilaterally, bilateral cooperation as well. And we also need to engage in the communication supranaturally as well, and that makes today's forum all the more meaningful. And we can see that the presentations have been quite insightful about climate changes. And I were able to see the highlights through your presentations. And also regarding biodiversity and wetland conservation, they are very important for climate change. North Korea's average temperature rise for the past 100 years was twofold that of South Korea and threefold globally. North Korea is actually in sort of climate union with South Korea because we share borders. So if the climate change are not well responded in North Korea, then South Korea will be affected as well. So we need to think of it as a union's perspective. We need to take a more solidarity-based perspective. And let me give you an example of an apple. An apple used to be very well known in Daegu in South Korea, but now the apple in the Yeoncheon, in the border area, is getting a lot of popularity. And maybe in like 10 to 20 years, maybe we won't see any South Korean apples. We'll see apples being raised in North Korea. Then we would have to import the North Korean apple. And I can really say that the apple in Korea is the best in the world, but if we find ourselves in that kind of situations, it will be really unfortunate, and that is why we need to address the climate change even more. And we have had lots of cooperation regarding environment, both in terms of financial and technological aspects. And the HSF, I heard that there has been lots of research regarding the environmental cooperation between the East Germany and West Germany, and maybe we could refer to that cases as we pursue with our environmental cooperation between the two Koreas. And we also have to think about how to do after reunification. Reunification will impose a lot of cost, so we would have to be prepared in advance. And considering all that, well, if you look at all of the cooperative measures between the East Germany and West Germany, it could give a lot of insights to us. And also, Professor Kang told us about how the North Korean government is making a lot of endeavors to respond to climate change. And indeed, I could see that North Korean government is doing their part despite a lot of difficult circumstances, seeing from the fact that they are joining the international institutions, and they've also submitted the VNR, Voluntary National Report, and they also they said that they're going to reduce the carbon emissions by about 16% independently, and they could reduce the emissions by about 50% upon the international aid. And we have like 2030 NDCs, so we hope to reduce the carbon emissions by 30% by 2030. And we made a commitment, but North Korea submitted the VNR, and that is why there lies some differences between South Korea and North Korea, because North Korea's part is not obligatory. They're saying that they're going to do it voluntarily as opposed to us, which is a more mandatory commitment. And also they said that they're going to produce electricities based on the wind power generations. And they're going to utilize the renewable energy and legislate laws and do reforestation and focus on cycle economies and recycle and reuse. So looking at all of these range of activities, we can maybe come to a conclusion that North Korea is actually doing some active work in this area, but there are limitations by the North Korean government, especially faced by the sanctions of the UN. And when you want to do an environmental cooperation, but if there are some technologies related to security, then this could get the sanctions from the US. And we would have to help North Korea out as the two Germanys helped each other out, but there could be some technical issues and financial issues. So we need to keep all of these in mind. We need to understand the limits of North Korea first as we decide upon the measures to help them out. And also, we need to communicate well in order to achieve the Green Détente. Because once we have a more smooth communication with one another, we'll be able to understand which would be the best way to help North Korea out. Well, I am not an economic expert of North Korea, so I won't be able to delve into that. But looking at all of these issues, well, North Korea has a different system. They have a socialist system. They do everything based on a government planning, so they tend to be inefficient and they have low productivity. And that is why the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia emerged, and that may be because of the inefficiencies within the economic systems, and that could be a problem with North Korea as well. And so I hope that we need to maybe refer to the cases of the papers of the economics major and think about how best to formulate the environmental cooperations between the two Koreas. And lastly, regarding solutions, lots of the presenters have gave us lots of important ideas. But Professor Kang said that an East Asia mechanism would be very important. East Asia would mean China, Taiwan, Mongolia, North Korea, and South Korea, and Japan, maybe. So if we all work together for fine dust or the reforestation or wetland conservations, then we'll be able to look at this from a big picture, and we can consult one another, and we can maybe give out international assistance. Because North Korea is recognizing itself that if, based on the international assistance, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions even more. And maybe we can utilize other international organizations under the UN. And if we can all work toward that, and we will be able to help North Korea achieve the net zero targets. And also, maybe FDI could be another measure, or FDA signing could be another measure for protecting environment. We can help promote the renewable energy and maybe provide some financial assistance and provide capacity building and technological assistance. But again, all of these is possible if we have smooth communication with one another. So again, we need to think about the multilateral cooperation mechanism and international assistance program for North Korea, and maybe bilateral cooperation mechanism between South Korea and North Korea. Either no matter what the type would be, we need to look at the different areas of all kinds of areas, from political areas to way up to the hydrological area. And I think that the East Germany and the West Germany's case before unification was and could be a very important benchmark for us. And lastly, I want to be more involved in the environmental protection of North Korea, but unfortunately there's not much data available for the public. But that is why the KEI's Environmental Center and the KDI's Center's data could be important for us. But even so, these data are quite limited. And North Korea says that they're going to achieve net zero by 2030, as according to VNR. And if that is to happen, I believe that more active research is necessary. So I look forward to more active research in various areas in this regard. In that case, this research can create a more virtuous cycle for researchers of other areas as well. And we need to identify other inter-Korean cooperative initiatives as well. And that is it. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다. 바로
Thank you, Professor Kang. Let's move straight to Professor Yoon, please. Yes, hello. My name is Yoon Tae-young from Gyeongnam University. Thank you for your brilliant speeches. I would like to thank our three speakers on North Korea, climate change, biodiversity, and wetland conservation, to be specific. So as I listened to the three presentations and prepared my comments, I was able to learn a lot about how North Korea was, contrary to my expectations, very actively participating in discussions on the global level, and they were amending their statutes, strategic reports, and other publications. And in that regard, I think this brings more importance to inter-Korean cooperation, and we need a more comprehensive, holistic approach. That's what I came to think. So in the order of the presentations, I would like to ask one or two questions to each speaker. So, regarding Mr. Kang Taek-gu's presentation, climate change in North Korea and inter-Korean green cooperation. So you introduced how they were formulating laws and strategic reports to fight climate change, and in particular, you mentioned the VNR, their voluntary efforts that they submitted to the United Nations. My question is, as North Korea tries to align their national goals with the SDGs, so their NDGs with the SDGs of the UN, well, they have announced that they will try to align these two goals. In the process of that, their NDGs are focused on maximizing production, their economic productivity, whereas SDGs are more oriented towards holistic views, including ecology, social issues, environmental issues, and so forth. So there's a bit of a mismatch between the focuses of these two frameworks. So in a position when they have to pursue urgent economic development, how do you think it would be feasible for them to connect their economic agendas with the environment agendas? Do you think it's really actionable? How much promise do you think this strategy has? So I would like to ask your views on this. And just to be brief, regarding the meteorological sector, in 2017, we kicked off the working level discussions on South and North Korea meteorological discussions. However, our relations kind of aggravated, and the working level discussions have been discontinued ever since. And in this aspect, Dr. Kang proposed that there has to be an East Asian multilateral consultative body. So I also agree that those efforts are important. So regarding that, aside from the multilateral organization, between South and North Korea and the United States, regarding security on the Korean Peninsula and the direct stakeholders to that, should there be a regional consultative body, or how much progress has been made in establishing that sort of organization? And the second question, the second presentation, was about biodiversity of the DPRK and sustainable development. So what I was impressed about your presentation was that there was a serial effect from food and energy shortage, a domino effect of sorts. It was very interesting, and as I was listening to your speech, I could realize that food shortage, energy shortage, and deforestation, it was very clear where it started, where it was headed. And it was very intuitive and easy to understand. Well then, regarding that, at the end of the day, the fundamental cause of the deforestation is economic reasons, energy shortage and food shortage, right? These issues, of course, has to do with their economic circumstances, but also it has to do with how they are not stopping their nuclear experiments and their very hostile military actions toward the international communities and the very strict economic sanctions that they have led themselves into. So, consequently, these economic and military issues have imposed negative impacts on their ecosystem. This is one way we could put it. So, just like our moderator, Mr. Hoang, mentioned, there's high politics and low politics. And in some ways, they can be viewed separately, but in this regard, we could say that still, the economic and military issues at the high politics level is still negatively impacting the low politics agendas. So I would like to ask for your thoughts on this. And finally, regarding the third presentation by Dr. Choi, I didn't know that the Han Seidel Foundation Korea was working so actively in these causes. I did visit your website, but amidst these difficulties in communicating with North Korea and these obstacles that hold you back from exchanging with them, I came to know that there was such a brilliant NGO that was very enthusiastically involved in these efforts. So, against this backdrop, the wetland conservation project is aimed at ultimately relieving their economic distress and bringing more benefits to the North Korean people and to facilitate sustainable development of their ecosystem. So I'm curious to know how much we can help in that regard and what kind of difficulties you are facing. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And I would like to stop there. Yes, thank you. And next, let's move on to Professor Hoang.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you.
귀하신 분들 우리 강태구 박사님, 공우석 박사님, 최은하 박사님 통해서
Professor
많이 배웠고요.
Director Kang, Professor Kong, Dr. Choi, and everyone, thank you so much for giving me this insightful presentations and discussion
특히
questions.
저는 북한이 이렇게 기후 변화에 대해서 국제적으로 이렇게 참여하고 노력해
In
왔다는
particular,
것을
I did not know that North Korea was quite active in these global efforts to respond to climate change. And also the North Korea's Vienna report to the UN and North Korea's willingness to participate in the carbon neutrality effort was actually quite interesting.
박사님이 또 그 결론 부분에서
But
말씀하셨지만
as
무엇보다
Director Kang
북한이
said,
국제사회에 편입되기 위해서는 결국
in order for North
북한의
Korea to
그런 비핵화
participate in the
실마리를
international
선택하는
community's
것이
efforts,
저도
North Korea has to
필요한 것이
first
아닌가.
denuclearize.
지금 현재 우리가 막혀 있는 것이 아닌가 생각이 들고요.
And maybe that is where
최근에 또 어제도
the bottleneck lies. North Korea is now firing missiles, and they say that the seventh nuclear test
현재 이렇게
is
북한이 미사일을
imminent.
이렇게 도발하는 상황에서 남북 기후 환경
And
협력이
North Korea
계속
is
힘든
continuing
상황이니까
these provocations, and that is what makes these
그러한
inter-Korean
어떤 북한의 어떤
climate
미사일 도발
cooperation
때문에 또
difficult.
일본이 더 그렇게 무장을 할 수
And
있는
this is
그런
leading
계기를
to
마련해주고
the Japan's
사실
armament efforts
이게
as well.
그 기후 환경과 관련 있는 부분인데 후쿠시마
And this is related to climate
방사능
change.
오염수를 이제 내년 봄에
The
일본이 발행하기로
Fukushima
결정을
contaminated
했는데
water will be
사실 그런
released
부분을 우리
next
남과 북한이
spring
같이
in
협력해서
Japan.
대응하고
And I believe that North Korea
하는
and
것이
South
필요한데
Korea would
지금
have to
그런
cooperate
것도
together in this
사실
matter.
지금 어떤
But
미사일
even in this matter, we cannot cooperate
발사라든지
because of the
핵실험 이런 것
provocation caused by
우리가
North Korea
협력할 수
in
있는
terms of missile
아주 좋은 기회를
tests and possible
맞이했음에도
nuclear
못하고
tests.
있는 것은
So
아닌가
even though the
아쉬움이
time is
듭니다.
opportune, we are not able to utilize them well.
그냥 제 의견을 잠깐 나누면은요.
And let me share my opinions.
우리 한반도는 일단 미국이나 중국 또 유럽과 달리
The
예를 들어서 태양광을
Korean
봐도
peninsula is different from
미국에
the
비해서 태양의
US
그
or
양이 태양광 양이
the
절반밖에 안
European Union
되고
or China,
풍력도
because solar
영국의
power
한
is just
3분의 1밖에 안
half
되고
of the US, and
그러니까
and
재생
wind power we
에너지
are
같은
also
경우에는
1/3 of
저밀도
the
에너지다 보니까
European
땅 면적이 많이
area.
필요한데 한반도 같이 좁은
And
면적에서는
especially for Korea with a very small
이런
land
재생
mass,
에너지가
this
미국이나
renewable
중국,
energy
영국 이런
sources
데 비해서 사실 불리한
are
상황입니다. 그런
quite in an
의미에서
unfavorable position compared to the US
에너지
and the
안보를
UK.
위해서도 그리고 기후 변화
So
대응을
for the sake
위해서도
of energy security
기후 변화 대응을 위해서
and
탄소
to
중립
respond
시대를
to climate
위해서도
change and to
저는
achieve
그런
carbon
원전
neutrality,
에너지가 어떻게 보면
we
하나의 대안이
believe
될 수 있지 않을까.
we can
예를 들어서
or we should
RE100
utilize
같은
nuclear
경우에는
power.
이제 그 비영리
In the case of
단체가
RE100,
추진하는 탄소 중립 100% 실현
this
2050년도까지
is a
실현을 하는데
initiative
그
proposed
원전을
by
포함시키고
the
있지
NGO,
않지만
and
유엔에서
they do
추진하는
not include nuclear
칼본
power there,
프리백이라는
but
CF100 같은
the carbon-free
경우에는
100,
원전도 녹색 에너지로
CF100,
또 포함시키고 있거든요.
led by the
그래서
UN, includes
원전
nuclear power in their
수소 에너지나
system.
원전 같은 것을 우리가 대안으로 해서
So
계속해서
we
이제
need to continue to
향후
focus on
활용하는 방안을 남북이
hydrogen
합의해야 되는 것이
and
아닌가 생각이
nuclear
드는데
power as
혹시
we
그
continue on
발표자분
with
중에
our energy
그
transition.
원전에 대한 의견은 어떠신지
And I want
이게 뭐
to know
정권에 대한
about
또
your
영향이지만은
opinions
그냥
of nuclear power.
한번 의견을 듣고 싶고요. 그리고 두 번째로는
And secondly,
기본적으로 우리가 북한의 뭐 산림 황폐화라든지 이런 것을 막기 위해서
in order
우리가
to
남는 그 식량들을 갖다가
avoid
쌀도
the North
보내주고
Korea
그리고
deforestation efforts,
북한에
we
나무를
send
심고
our
나무도
rices
보내주고 하는
to
그런
North
사업들이
Korea, and we
좀
send trees to
지속적으로
North Korea.
필요하고 지금
And these
북한이
kinds of
저렇게
efforts need to be
핵실험하고
sustained.
미사일을 쏴대더라도
And
우리가
even though North
계속해서
Korea continues its
북한과 관계 개선을
provocations,
하고 싶어하는 그런 의지를 이런 뭐
we need to
식량
show to North Korea that we are willing to improve our relations by, say, sending rices or sending forests.
결국
We need to express
이러한
our
협력이
willingness to cooperate
가능하기
with North
위해서는
Korea
지금
continuously. But for
북한이
these
계속해서
cooperation to
미사일을
work,
뭐 계속 쏴대고 있는데
Well,
이틀치 미사일 쏜
North
뒤에 뭐
Korea
2년치
is
식량
really
수입
launching
애기랑 맞먹는다는 그런
missiles
신문기사도 봤는데
multiple times, and the
어,
missiles that were fired for the
정말,
past 2
이러한,
days are really tantamount to
핵실험보다는
the food
이러한
prices of
부분들을
2
좀
years.
대화의 장으로
So we
나오는 것이
really
북한도
hope
필요하고
North
우리
Korea
남한도
to
계속해서
come back to the dialogue
북한과의 관계
forum,
개선
and
의지가 있다는 것을 계속해서
at the same
의지를
time,
필요한
South Korea would have to
생각이 듭니다.
continue to express our
마지막으로
willingness
그냥
to
하나만 더 덧붙이면
commit to a
지금
communication
아까
with North
하이poli틱스,
Korea.
로poli틱스
Also,
말씀을
you talked about
해주셨는데
high politics and
지금
low
사실 국제
politics.
정세가 아주
And the
긴박하게 돌아가고
current
있습니다.
international political
지금
landscape is changing
러시아도
very
저렇고
rapidly,
그다음
as in the case of
중국도
Russia or
지금
China.
이제 시진핑 체제가 3년임이 되고
The China's
독재
Xi
권위
Jinping
체제가
regime
공과되는
will
상황에서
be more solidified for the next
미국이
3 years.
저는 이제
And,
미국 정치를 공부하다 보니까
Well, as I am an
미국이
expert in
정말
the U.S. politics,
빠르게 돌아가고 있습니다. 미국이라는
the
나라가
U.S. is changing very rapidly as
중국이 늘
well.
주장하듯이 아메리칸 모델은 비효율적이고 중국
The
모델이 더
Chinese
낫다고 주장하는데
people are saying that the
놀라운
American
것은
model is very
최근에 지난 8월에
inefficient, but what's
보통 법안이 통과하려면
surprising is
수개월에서
that,
뭐 1년 이상
well, in many
걸리는데
cases, the laws
중국을
take
갖다가
up several
압박하고
years
중국이 패권을 넘보지
to
못하도록 누르는
be
그런
enacted,
법안들
but the laws to really overwhelm the China, like in the case of CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, like the IRA, these acts took less than 2 weeks
상원에서 통과,
to be
하원에서 통과하고
passed.
대통령이 사인하는데 2-3주
The
만에 다
whole period
통과하면서
of passing the
그렇게
House and the
이제 앞으로
Senate
모든
and getting the
반도체는
President's
미국
signature, it took
본토에
less than
지어라.
2
그리고
weeks.
전기차
So this
배터리는 이제 미국
involves
본토에 지어라.
making
그것은
the
제가 볼 때
battery
미국이
production
패권을 앞으로
sites in
공부하는
the US.
방향에서
And
만에 하나
this, I believe,
지금,
would be very important for the US to establish its hegemony.
한미일 그다음에 중러 북
If Korea,
이렇게
the US,
이제
Japan,
체제 어떤
and
의 어떤 갈등 상황
the
속에서
China, Russia, and North Korea are
만에 하나
grouped together
한반도의
respectively.
유사시 그리고 중국이
In
대만과의
case
어떤
of
그런 무력 충돌 시를
emergencies that happen on the
대비해가지고
Korean Peninsula,
미국은 이미
and in case
대비해서
of
이제
military
모든
conflicts,
반도체 공급에 문제가 있지
the
않도록 모든
US
반도체와
is making
그런
preparatory
공급망과
efforts to
그리고
prevent any possible
자동
disruptions to
전기차와
supply
배터리 이런 것들이
chains
이제 미국
regarding
본토에
batteries
짓고
or
있는
EVs
상황인데
and semiconductors.
그만큼 지금 이러한 국제 정세가 아주
So you can see
위기이고
that
어떻게
the
보면 기회가
international
될 수 있는
political
상황인데
landscape is
우리
changing very rapidly.
남한이
It can serve
지혜롭게
as both a
북한과
challenge but
그런
at the same time an opportunity.
극한으로 치닫지
So we
않고
hope that
계속해서
we
관계
can be
개선을 할 수
wise
있도록 이
and
상황에서도
do not
지혜를
push the
발휘하고
situation to the
역량을 모아야 될
brink.
때가
We need
아닌가.
to
그중에
collect wisdom
좋은
and gather
통로가
wisdom.
이러한
And
환경과
amidst this background,
기후
the
환경 협력을
ecological
통해서
cooperation and environmental
우리가
cooperation could be a good
가능하지
channel
않을까
to
그런
foster
의견을
cooperation.
이상입니다.
Thank you.
예, 고맙습니다. 바로
Thank
황교
you. And
부탁드리겠습니다.
Professor Hoang, please.
네, 경남연구원에서 남북
Yes, hello. I'm in charge of inter-Korean research at Gyeongnam Institute. My name is Gyo Uk. You know, as the final panelist, I feel a lot of pressure to keep to the time. I feel like I should be short, brief, so
환경 전문가도 아니고요.
I'm not an environment expert. I research into inter-Korean cooperation, but still, it was very nice to hear about wetland, climate change, and so forth, because I did also engage in research under these topics as well, because there has practically not been any inter-Korean discussions ever since 2016, and with COVID aggravating that, we have we have tried to find many indirect ways for us to get together and to discuss. And there's an international cooperative body that Gyeongnam Institute is participating in with. One of it is called East Asia Maritime Environment Management Institute, and the other organization is the Ramsar COP that Professor Choi talked about. And last year, I reviewed the other institute, and this year I reviewed the Ramsar COP, and this PEMC organization researches into maritime environment issues with its 14 members. And this organization believes that the most serious area is the Yellow Sea nearby China that carries the most severe waste problems. And since the ocean is all connected, North Korea is also participating in this discussion. And what brought them to the negotiating table to this discussion was because there's the Secretariat in the Philippines. And there was Dr. Shin, who is in charge of North Korea payment guarantees at the executive committee, and he said that North Korea is very enthusiastic in participating in these discussions, and there's a North Korean manager training in Singapore, and he asked whether if they were so enthusiastic in capacity building and in listening to the lectures and so forth. And they said that the ICM, when they join the ICM, they have two areas subject to trial management, and so there's one area in the West Sea and one in the East Coast, and this shows that they have interest in this maritime issues, which is becoming more and more severe. And there's another goal, which is to improve the situation along the coastlines and to improve their food shortage by facilitating fish farming along the coastlines, and also to facilitate ocean tourism and to, by extension, attract more tourists to North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. So our Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries is also participating in these discussions. Also, I'm not sure if we have him here, but Mr. Lee played a very key role at BMC, so he would be aware of the details. But although the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries have a fund allocated to this cause, the reason why they're having trouble executing that fund is because at the high politics level, there's sanctions on North Korea. And Dr. Shin expressed his views about this problem. As of now, North and South Korea cannot directly interact. However, if we could create an international conference with other members, we could have an indirect conversation there. And as for the Ramsar COP, I think it's one of the very important wetland-related international cooperation bodies. So there are two North Korean cities that are involved in this project, and South Korea also hosted one of the COP meetings. So consequently, at the Gyeongnam Institute, as a way to facilitate inter-Korean cooperation and the Ramsar COP, I think we have to coordinate our terminologies. So there's this type of bird who migrates through North Korea to Korea. However, there are different terms to call this bird. The academic term is the same, but North Korea calls durumi as the white crane, and the black crane in South Korea is also called in a different name in North Korea. So I think starting from the very littlest steps, we have to use the same terminology in both Koreas. And we will try to ramp up our migratory bird-related efforts and wetland conservation efforts by joining hands with North Korea. And especially in Kaesong, we are researching into the migratory route of eagles. They travel through South Korea, Mongolia, and also North Korea. And we have launched an academic research into this. And however, we have this void in the research because of North Korea. So in order to have a full understanding of their migratory routes, we would have to invite North Korea to be more involved in this project. So thank you.
예, 네 분 토론자들 말씀 정말 감사합니다.
Thank you, everyone, for your
사실 정치학에
valuable
있는데,
comments.
네 분들의 토론이
I am
워낙
a
이렇게
politics
광범위하게,
major,
전개가 되었기 때문에
but all the discussions
어떤
covered
방식으로
various
발표자분들이
topics.
정리를 해주실지
And I
저는 정리가 안
wonder
됩니다.
how the
그러니까
presenters will be
편하게
able to
정리해
summarize
주시면
them,
되고요.
because
우선
I am not sure
발표자분들
myself
말씀하시기
as a
전에
non-expert, but
우리
please feel free
플로어에서
to go over them.
편하게 뭐
But
코멘트라든지
does anyone from the floor
질문이라든지
has questions or
의견이
comments?
있으시면은
If you have any,
먼저
please feel free to
제기해
raise
주시고
hands.
모아가지고
And we would like to
최종적으로
collect the questions first,
발표자들께서
and then finally the
마무리 발언을
presenters will go over them all together. So anyone here?
네, 오늘 또 공 박사님하고 최
Yes,
박사님께서
Professor Kang and Professor Choi talked about deforestation efforts. Thank you so much.
산림 분야 관련해서 많이 이니셔티브를 가지고 남북
Hans Tidal Foundation is focused primarily on forestation
그게
efforts,
지금도 진행이 되고 있는 것인지
and I wonder
그리고,
whether that cooperation is
이게
ongoing,
람사르와 뭐 같이 병행되는
and I
것인지
wonder whether they are being
근데
pursued
아까
jointly
말씀하신
along with the Ramsar Convention. But until 2021, they have been focused until conservation for forest. But in 2022, that part has been quite neglected. So I want to understand the outlook in this forestation-related cooperation. Thank you.
예, 다른 분 계신가요?
Does anyone else has questions?
다른 질문. 예, 오케이.
Thank you very much. It was very instructive for me because I have zero knowledge, unfortunately, about the environmental issues, especially in North Korea. But could we please take a step back, and if you could tell me more why the environmental issues are important for North Korea? Because in my head, I had a perception that North Korea is completely outside of the global agenda and does not really care about what is happening in the world. So that would be very instructive. Thank you.
또 다른 분 안 계신가요? 안 계시면 제가 질문 하나 드릴게요. 네.
I would like to ask one question as well.
제재를 받고 있고
Well,
또
North
하나는
Korea is under sanction.
전력 상황이 되게 안 좋은 걸로 알고 있고요.
And I understand that the power situation in North Korea is really not good. And when North Korea wants to generate electricity, they need to import the fuels from other countries, but they won't have that import money. And in that case, maybe if it were me, I would invest in renewable energies because we wouldn't have to import the fuels because that is under sanctions. And I wonder whether North Korea is focusing or using renewable energies like solar power. Are there any research activities regarding that, or are there development activities ongoing? So that was what I was curious about. It would be grateful if you can address that question. Thank you.
예, 고맙습니다. 이렇게 발표자분들 또 충분히 말씀을
Yeah,
하셔야 되니까
thank you. So since we need to listen to the answers
말씀을 하시도록 하겠습니다.
of the presenters, we would like to stop the questions. Could Professor
예,
Choi,
부탁드리겠습니다.
Dr. Choi begin first?
네,
Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
많은 분들이 다양한 의견을 주셨고
So I received various questions. I would like to answer questions in reverse orders. First, renewable energies. Yes, North Korea is indeed utilizing renewable resources. They are actually utilizing the small-scale solar power PV panels. A lot of the apartment complexes in Pyongyang are utilizing that, and they're installed in small cities as well. Also, regarding biogas converters, we are currently in discussions. I cannot specify which organizations there are, but indeed, the domestic organizations, international organizations, and global companies are all involved in these consultations. So North Korea is actively reviewing the renewable energy uses, and from the HSF, the Hans Tidal Foundation, we focus on forestation, of course. In my presentation, forestation was not included, but as I said, and the forestation experts from 2019 to now are currently working in Bufs University in Berlin. So that forestation expert is currently getting training as a visiting professor, and the person is conducting research regarding forestation, and they are also working with Tina Research Institutes about utilizing the forest resources. And also the Professor Yoon just pointed out that, well, we have an online program for the wetlands. In 2021, the online program has been focused on the wetlands, but in 2022, we are focused more on green growth.
저희가 검토를 해서 북측 파트너 기관들과 의제 설정을
And
하고
we
관련된 교육을
reviewed
진행을
them
하고 있습니다.
and together with North
교수님이
Korea to decide
말씀하셨던
upon
우리
the education
한시아이들
program
재단의
topics,
습지보호
and
활동
also about the
관련들을
wetlands conservation
산림을
efforts of
포함한
Hans
환경 관련된
Seidel
부분은
Foundation.
지역 주민의 생활 환경 개선과 관련이
Well,
있습니다.
these
그래서
environmental
저희는
protection
국가
activities
단위가
are
아니라
related to the
국제
the residents of
특히나
North
독일
Korea.
정부의
As an
지원을
international
받고 개발
NGO
협력 측면,
funded
어떻게 보면
by
ODA
the German
측면의
government,
접근이고요.
we
저희가
are
계속해서
focused more
말씀드리는
on the
부분이 small
ODA
is beautiful.
aspect. We
아주 조그마한
continue to say
소규모
that
형태로
small is
진행되고
beautiful
있습니다.
because small
그
measures
소규모
can
형태
lead to beautiful
안에는
outcomes.
평양에서 약
And
25km 떨어진 대동호 상서리 양묘장에
대동군
양묘장 조성
tree
사업이
nursery
들어가
science,
있고요.
which
그
is
양묘장
25 kilometers away from
조성된
Gyeongnam.
그 양묘장 인근에 거주하는 지역 주민들을
We
위한 인문복합
provide
경영, 나무와 곡물,
a forest
뭐 감자나
plus
옥수수
crop
또
or
플러스
mixed
아로니아라던가
crop
우리 그런 꽃감을
production
만들 수 있는
methods,
감나무라던가
training
이런
system
부분도
for
같이
the
지원이 되고
nearby
있고요.
residents.
아로니아 같은 경우는
And
현재도
for
저희가
Aronia,
언급이 저희 단체 이름 언급되지 않지만 그렇게
and
많은
these
양은
Aronia
아닙니다.
related
1톤 정도 수확을 해서
projects,
지역
it's about
주민들과
harvesting about 1
공유하고 있고
tons of
판매하고
Aronia
있다라는
to
그
share
보도
with the
자료도
residents.
저희가
And
모니터링했습니다.
we already
2019년까지
monitored the
방문했을
press
때도
release
그런 부분들도
regarding that
계속
Aronia's
검토가 되고 있고요.
project, and we saw the
또
outcomes ourselves in
하나는 정치 군사 문제를
2019.
떠나서 환경
Also,
생태에
aside from the political and
관련된 부분
military aspects,
하고
the
또
eco
저희가
and
연구를
environmental
활발히
protection
진행을 하면서
efforts
어떻게
are
하면
going
협력을 할
on,
수 있는지
and we
이런
want to
부분에 대해서
understand how
언급을
best
계속
to
말씀을 드리고 있고요.
facilitate the cooperation
저희는 지원이
economically
아니라
and
교류
ecologically,
협력
and we don't
측면에서
focus on
연구자 대
simple
연구자 또는
assistance. We
도움이
focus
필요한
on the
분야에서 적극적으로 제가
cooperation. We
그
focus
공석
on the
교수님이나
researcher to
강백구
researcher
박사님께
cooperation.
궁금한 부분이 있으면 질문하듯이
As I
이런
ask questions
측면으로
to my
교류
fellow
협력을 진행하고
colleagues
있다라는
here,
부분을
we engage
말씀드리고
in similar
싶습니다.
level cooperation with North
도움을
Korea
주는
as well.
입장일 수도 있고 도움을
We
받는 입장일 수도 있기
can
때문에
provide
그
assistance and we can
경계선이 저희가
receive
확실하게
assistance.
구분은
So we
어렵습니다. 그러나 교류
shouldn't really
협력이라는 측면에서 저희가
distinguish the
논의하고 있다는
boundaries,
점.
but we
환경
focus more
박사님이
on the
팸씨와
collaboration and
람사르 채널에 대해서
cooperation.
말씀해 주셨는데
Also about
한
PEMC
가지
and
또
Ramsar
추가하고 싶은
channel, I want to
부분은
add one thing.
저희도 그렇지만 담당
Well,
기관이
we,
달라지면 그 채널이
as in the case
달라집니다.
of South
팸씨
Korea,
같은 경우는
whenever
제가 알기로는
the agencies in charge
재경제성사나
change,
국제기구,
other
국제기구
things
협력
change
총국,
as
즉
well.
GBCIO에서 적극
And
참여를 하고 있고요.
GBCI, the
람사르 총국,
GBCI
람사르협약
is the
같은 경우는
participant for
국토환경보호성
PEMC, and
대협조국이 적극
for
참여를 하고
Ramsar, the
있습니다.
other
산림 같은
organization is
경우는
taking part. For
국토환경보호소
forestation, the Ministry of
산림 총국 안에
Land and
대협조차가 적극
Environment
참여를 하고 있습니다.
Protection is the
이
main
채널들이
agency.
다 다르기
So
때문에
because
이것을
these
저희가
different
어떻게
channels are
구분을
taking
하고
part in the
통합적으로
activities,
접근할지
it's
각
important to look at
섹터마다 각
them at a more
분야마다 어떻게 접근해야
comprehensively.
될지에
We
대한 검토가
need to
필요하다고 생각이
review
되고요.
how to approach these
마지막으로
different agencies.
sorry I forgot your name, but you mentioned about the why North Korea focus on the environmental cooperation. Why? That means it's a global issue. They want to be a normal country beyond the nuclear issue, beyond the political issue. They are the isolated country, but on the other hand, they want to be a normal country. That's why they do the more international cooperation. As I know, they do many activities from 1990s. Even they have a very difficult situation that period, and recently after 2015 they do more activities, and last year they published a very the national voluntary review is a global targeting related to SDG goals, and they do more active things. I will maybe Professor Kong and Professor Kang, you will give more details. I want to shortly mention about your question. Thank you. 감사합니다.
네, 바로 공 교수님 부탁드리겠습니다.
And Mr. Kong, please.
네, 다양한 질문들이 나왔기 때문에
Yes, so thank you
제가
very
이제
much for those
답할 수 있는
questions.
부분만 좀 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
So I would just like to answer the questions that I can. Regarding Professor Yoon's question about deforestation,
제가 북한 문제에 관심 가지고 이제 한 게 90년대
I think it
후반이거든요.
was around the late
그때 이제
1990s when I started having interest in issues in North Korea.
이런 문제 때문에
And
이런
that
문제가 생기지
was when
않나
I
하는
started to develop this systematic perspective into this issue. Some people saw my research and really agreed on the importance. So I think
중요한 정보가 되는 것들이 우리한테 이제 접근이 현실적으로
we realistically have limited access to information that we need to find out more about the North Korean
우리가
status.
생각하는 거하고 북쪽 사람들이 실제 운신할 수 있는
And
거하고는 상당한
what
차이가
we
있다고
think
생각을 합니다.
and the room for maneuver that they
최연아
actually
박사님
have could be
말씀하신 대로
different, just like
북쪽 사람들의 내부 역량
Dr. Choi
강화하는 게
mentioned.
필요한데
It's
그게
important for them to
국제
develop their
기구를
internal
통하거나
skills
혹은
and develop their capacities, but
교류 협력을 통해서 그게 가능한데
we have to facilitate that through discussions on the international platform. But the problem is that it's realistically difficult, and we find it very difficult to discern which advice they can really accept and which they cannot. So we have to find out more about what they want to know, what they can implement, and we have to prepare for that specifically. But the efforts view and the North Korean decision makers' views also differ. So we have a lot of difficulty in figuring out who our real partners are and whether or not this would help in their decision-making process. We have to figure that out first and then try to craft our approach. So this, the way how international discussions go can be very tricky in that aspect.
그럼에도 불구하고 이제 각 분야별로
However, nevertheless, we
채널을 유지하려고 혹은 확보하려고 하는
are trying hard to secure a channel of communication, and I think North Korean experts want to be engaged in these efforts, but when the decision makers were not so enthusiastic, it was very difficult to bring them into the discussion. We did not have any guarantee I would see this representative that I saw in a meeting in another meeting or in a follow-up meeting. So I think we have to get that straight. And just like Mr. Hoang said, we have to standardize the terminology, I think. And we have started our discussions in archaeology very early on, and in that space, the terminologies are very well coordinated. We try to translate all the Chinese words into Korean and use the same words in South and North Korea. So since that process took place first, all the follow-up discussions went very well, but in the environment space, we didn't have that coordinating process. So I think we have to study each other's terminology first and see how much overlap. And I think we have to work more on that before we conduct in-depth research. But these, the ROI on these efforts are not really great. So that's why they're not a high priority for the decision-making authorities in South Korea. So I think the task is what institutional efforts we can put in to resolve this problem. And regarding the route of migratory birds, recently we're using GPS to monitor their movement in real time. So I think compared to the past, the process itself has become much more efficient. And Mr. Hoang threw a very thought-provoking question, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it's impossible to come up with supply that meets demand. So the most practical option that we have now is to minimize supply and to reduce demand of nuclear power or fossil fuels and to try to replace that demand with renewable energy. So I think that's the most optimal route that we can choose and the most ideal way to fight climate change. So in solving the urban traffic problems, constructing more roads and etc. was definitely not a wise choice. So we should not keep wasting energy like we did thus far. We have to fundamentally change our way of thinking, or else we would not be able to fundamentally resolve this challenge. So I would like to stop there. Thank you.
So we were able to listen to the presentations and the comments from various fields, and we can say that it was indeed a very successful forum. And thank you so much for your rich discussions.
주셨던 의견들과 뭐 코멘트 이런 것들에 대해서 좀 이렇게 한 분 한 분씩 좀 가급적 제가 아는 범위
I
내에서
would like to
말씀드리도록
go
하겠습니다.
over each comment and questions as much as I can do. First of all, regarding the various ideas by Professor Kang your idea about how to refer to the German case was indeed a very interesting and meaningful idea. Because looking back, the previous achievements have not been quite well summarized or organized. Well, in Germany, the unification took place in 1990s, and until the 2000s, there has been lots of research regarding unification, and the Unification Ministry also reported a lot of the documents, but most were regarding the laws and regulations. So this is indeed an area that worth looking into. And also Professor Yoon asked firstly that while North Korea's priority is economic development, and how can the economic objectives and the SDG be aligned? He asked whether these two track approaches can be feasible.
지금 최근에 북한의 그 환경 협력들의 흐름들을 좀 보면
And if you look at how North Korea has been conducting the economic cooperations, we can see that North Korea is preferring the cooperation with the multilateral organizations instead of cooperating with individual countries.
그러면 이 북한이 왜 할까라는 생각을 좀 해보면
And we need to ask why.
이게 저는 이제 돈이 아닌가 싶어요.
I think it all comes down to money.
SDG라는 것이 하나의 일종의 큰 규범이 됐고
Now in the international community, SDG is an important norm.
북한 스스로도 따라가지
So
않으면
unless North Korea follows this norm itself, then the international community or the individual countries, they wouldn't be giving any assistance or.
아마 이런 게 관련이 있다 보니까 이렇게
And maybe that is why North Korea is moving in that direction.
예를 들면 이제 뭐 그게 전혀 경제 목표들을 달성한다고 그러는데 사실 이게
Well, as for the economic objectives, well, NGTS, if you look at them, they are all 17 different tasks that they're facing, the immediate tasks that can be resolved. Well, I haven't included in that presentation, but the first goal is about poverty reduction or poverty elimination. SDG 1 is about poverty elimination, and that can be linked to poverty reduction in North Korea. And also regarding agricultural sector in SDG, it can be linked to the self-sufficiency of foods of North Korea, and also for the industrial sector as well.
목표 8에 이제 SDG에 있는데
It is in the
생산과
8th,
고용,
it is the SDG goal number 8.
지속가능한 경제 성장 뭐 이런 것이 있으면
And
자주적인 뭐 경제
it can be
건설,
linked to a
생산적
more
일자리
self-sufficient
제공,
economic
이런 식으로
development
자기네들이
for North Korea.
목표들을 좀 러프하게 좀 있지만 좀 들어가면 좀 세부 목표들이 조금 있긴 합니다. 정밀하게 있지는
So there could
않습니다만
be more
그런 식으로
detailed
하나하나씩
alignment
목표들을 다
between
이렇게
the
걸어놓고
different
있어요.
goals and
그래서
objectives.
이것들을 걸어놓음으로써 이제 국제사회에 우리가 이 목표를 달성하기 위해서 돈을 지원을 받겠다.
And if they show that these goals are aligned, then they could, to the international community, then it's more likely that they can get the assistance financially. I'm not really sure, but maybe in SDG number 16, there is a part about partnership.
이거는 이제 뭐 선진국이나 이런 국가들이 개도국에 돈을 이렇게 도움을 주면
So when the advanced nations give financial assistance to the developing countries, it counts as development assistance, or it counts as contribution to SDG. So it is a win-win strategy for developed countries and for North Korea as well.
그 지원을 해줄 수가 없는
If they
상황이구나.
don't
이렇게
focus on these
연계해서
global objectives, they won't be able to
진행을
get the
하고 있다라고
assistance
말씀을
from the international community,
이게
and that
뭐
is why they are moving in that direction,
잘
maybe.
되겠냐?
And as for whether it would actually work
국제사회
out,
제재라든지
well,
이런
with
것들이
the
있으니까.
sanctions in the
아까 뭐
international community,
제일 뭐 그나마 가능한 건 영양 배양 사업밖에
I
없어요.
think that capacity building
더
system would be the most feasible and practical
홍 교수님 더
system.
아시겠지만
I guess other professors
국제사회
are
지금
more
대북
aware
제재
of this
속에서
than
진행할
me.
수 있는 건
But under the
돈
current
들어가면 안
sanction
되고,
systems, the financial
들어가면 안
assistance
되니까
cannot be
사람은
provided,
만나서 할 수 있는 것밖에
and
없기 때문에
the only possible
그나마
way
이제
would be a
영양
human-to-human
배양 사업 통해서 지금
interactions,
돌파를
and
찾아야
that is
되겠고요.
why the capacity building system
또
would be the
하나는
only
이제
option
그 과자
that is
말고 이제
feasible,
소다자
and also a more
남북미
small-scale multilateral
협력
cooperation
말씀하셨는데
like South Korea
되면 좋을 것
and
같아요.
North Korea and the U.S. cooperation.
그러니까
If
다양한
it can work
형태들로
out, it will be
좀
great.
소다자주의
So these kinds of
형태들을 좀
small-scale multilateral
협력의 방안을 찾는 것도
mechanisms
상당히
could
좋은
be important
방안이다.
and could be
요즘
a
뭐
good way
크게
forward.
크게는 아니지만 6개, 7개
So you don't have to really focus on the cooperation between 6 to 7 countries. Rather, if you go for a more small-scale cooperation between the other multiple countries, it could be a good way.
교수님께서 이제
And also,
도전적이라고
Professor Hoang
도발적인
said it's a very challenging goal, but I would say that this is a more
이
provocative
세션에서 아마 이
goal.
부분들이 본격적으로 좀 다뤄지지 않을까
And
싶습니다.
maybe this issue can be delved deeper into session 2 because it will be a session with the energy experts.
뭐 장기적으로는 그렇게 가야 되지 않을까.
But in the long term, I think we need to go that way.
다만 이게 뭐 녹색 분류 체계에 편입을 해서
But well, the
원전이
including
하기 위해서는 여러
nuclear power in the green
조건들이 있는 걸로
taxonomy,
저는 알고
that
있습니다.
requires lots
그거를
of
충족하기
preconditions
위해서는
and criteria,
조건들이 있기
and
때문에
that could be quite
쉽지만은
stringent
않은데
criteria. So it won't be easy to
장기적으로는
include
먼저
nuclear in the green taxonomy.
하나의 또 대안이 될
But
수도
going
있지
forward,
않겠나라는
nuclear
생각이
could
들고요.
be one alternative.
다음으로 그 아까 북한의 환경에 대해서 좀 왜 중요한지
And about why
협력이 왜
the
중요하냐
environment
이렇게
cooperation
여쭤볼
with
것
North
같은데요.
Korea is important. The very last
세 가지
question.
정도
I
좀 말씀을
think
드릴 수
there
있을 것
are
같아요.
3 answers. This is my personal
첫
opinion.
번째는 아마 인도주의적인
First, from the humanitarian perspective, it is
북한 간에
important.
특히 제가 아까 간단히 말씀을 드리긴
I
했습니다만
walked over this briefly.
북한에서 발생하는 자연재해가
The natural disaster in North
홍수라든지
Korea,
이런 것들이
like
이제
the floods,
전염병을 유발하고
this could cause
이제
infectious
보건
diseases,
위생에
and this could lead to some
말레리아,
healthcare issues like
수인성
malaria
질병이라든지
or
이런
waterborne
것들이 발생하게
diseases.
되고 그리고 곡물 수확량도 줄게 되고
And also it could
식량난이
reduce
자연스럽게
the
발생할
crop
수밖에
yields,
없고
leading to food
그래서 이제 뭐
shortages.
일부는 뭐 산에 들어가서 뭐 이렇게 뭘 먹는다든지
And some would have to go into
에너지
the
위기도
mountains and
벌목을 하게
forage
되고
the resources,
벌목을 하게
and
되면
they
또
would maybe
이
cut down the
재해도
trees,
취약할
and this could
수밖에
lead to
없는
deforestation, leading to
민둥산이니까
natural
비가 오면 또
disasters.
바로 쓸려내고
Because when there are no
그래서 계속
forests,
그런
no
악순환들이
trees in the
생기기
forest,
때문에
they could make
결국은
North
이런
Korea more
환경의
vulnerable
문제들을
to
해결되지 않으면
natural
북한이
disasters.
지속적인
So as
악순환에
such, it could be a
상황이 될
vicious
수밖에 없다.
cycle.
그러니까 물론 뭐 일부 평양이라든지 대도시는
Of course, in
나름의
Pyongyang or large
이런 것들이 잘
cities,
정리가 되어 있는
there
것
are
같은데
some
또 얘기를 들어보면
well-established
평양시
mechanisms.
내에서도
But based on what I heard, even in Pyongyang city,
아파트를 만들고 있지만
well, they are building like 50-story apartment
일부
complexes.
뭐 탈북자분들이나
But based on what I heard from North Korean defectors, there are lots of ironic situations. For example, boilers do not work, so they would have to burn the coals. And even within the inner city, they would have to burn coals and they would have to throw out the suits. And that's what's happening in the urban cities. So in the rural areas, it will be a much significant or a more serious problem. And secondly, in the inter-Korean relations, the environment is a non-political arena. So it could be a breakthrough for the promoting inter-Korean relations. It could help pump the inter-Korean relationship. Of course, it is not an easy task, but compared to other areas like political or military aspects, the environmental aspects or cultural aspects of the cooperation, that is the non-security cooperations, are much easy for promoting the collaboration between the two Koreas. Lastly, we conduct research on North Korea, maybe because we want to do a reunification based on our terms. But if we leave these environmental disasters on North Korea without doing anything, then it could be a burden for us if we do reunify. And it could
제가 정확히 기억은 안 납니다만
take up significant percentage of the financial money required for the reunification, as in the case of German unification as well. Some say that about 1/5 of the reunification cost was put into addressing the situations in East Germany's environmental situations. So these kinds of financial burdens could be a problem. So in the long term, if we can handle this now, it'll be better to handle this immediately. Well, North Korea may not like this, but we have to keep reunification in mind as we conduct research, and maybe that is one area to think about. So that was a three-pronged answer. Well, as we conduct research on North Korea, we have to keep reunification in mind. And lastly, about renewable energy.
북중 지역 내에도 태양광 패널
in the North Korea and China border,
자기 자체적으로 에너지들을 많이 쓴다고 그러더라고요.
I heard that they use a lot of PV-based energy, and I wanted to conduct research on that, but I didn't have much time. But
중국의 뭐죠?
the trade between North Korea and China, I'm not sure what they were called, but if you look at the Office of Customs, I think it's Customs Office of North Korea. And all these terms are really confusing, but if you look at these, you'll be able to see the HS codes needed for export and imports. I'm not really sure what the code is called. It's 6-digit code. And you can look at which export accounts for which codes. But I think most of the panels used in this border region are made in China. And maybe there could be a lot of reasons for that. One biggest reason would be, well, Kim Jong-un focused on road energy marks. And I think for electricity as well, the electricity line is important. So these kinds of electricity connectivity is important. But I think that the solar power panel used here is more small scale and for residential purposes. So I would like to stop here. Thank you.
So,
from the perspective of the host, I thought that was a wonderful discussion, and also the presentations were great, so I feel very happy as the moderator, and I have a lot to say, but in the interest of time, we would have to conclude our session here. Thank you, everyone.